Welcome. Get comfortable, let your body settle, and prepare to drift through the fascinating landscape of how your brain learns. Each fact we explore tonight will gently unfold, giving your mind something calm to follow as you ease into rest. Let's begin with something remarkable. Focus drives chemical changes in your brain. When you concentrate on learning something new, you're not just paying attention, you're literally transforming the physical structure of your mind. Deep focus triggers the release of neurochemicals like norepinephrine and acetylcholine. These chemicals act as biological highlighters, marking the neural pathways you're using as important. They signal to your brain. This matters, remember this. The longer and more intensely you focus, the stronger these chemical signals become, and the more robust the connections in your brain grow. It's a beautiful system, really. Your attention itself is the sculptor, reshaping your neural landscape with every moment of genuine concentration. But focus is only the beginning of the story. Sleep is when the save button is hit. All that concentrated effort, all those chemical changes triggered by focus, they need time to solidify. During sleep, particularly during the deeper stages, your brain replays the patterns you practiced while awake. It's like watching a recording of the day's learning in fast forward, over and over again. This process, called memory consolidation, takes those fragile temporary connections and transforms them into stable, long-lasting memories. Without sleep, the learning you worked so hard to achieve simply fades away, like writing on sand that the tide washes smooth. Your brain needs those hours of rest to transfer information from short-term holding areas into permanent storage. Sleep isn't downtime. It's when the real work of learning happens. And within sleep itself, there's a particular phase that does something extraordinary. REM sleep prunes to optimize your neural networks. During REM, the stage where dreams are most vivid, your brain doesn't just strengthen connections, it also weakens the ones you don't need. Think of your brain as a garden. Focus and practice plant new seeds and help them grow. But without pruning, the garden becomes overgrown, chaotic. REM sleep is the gardener, carefully trimming away the unnecessary, making sure that the important pathways stand out clearly. This is why you sometimes wake up with sudden clarity about a problem. Your brain has spent the night cleaning house, removing the noise, leaving only the signal. The optimization that happens during REM makes your knowledge more efficient, more accessible, sharper. You don't always need a full night's sleep to benefit from this process, though. Napping consolidates memory too. Even a brief 20-minute nap can enhance your ability to retain what you've just learned. Studies show that people who nap after learning perform significantly better on recall tests than those who stay awake. The nap gives your brain a chance to begin the consolidation process early, rather than waiting for nighttime. It's like saving your document multiple times while you work, rather than trusting everything to a single save at the end of the day. Short naps are particularly good at solidifying procedural memories, the how-to knowledge, the skills you practice with your hands or body. Longer naps, those that include deeper sleep stages, help with declarative memories, facts, concepts, information you can put into words. Within these sleep cycles, there's a specific phenomenon that plays a crucial role. Sleep spindles are brief bursts of brain activity that occur during non-REM sleep. They look like sudden spikes on an EEG, lasting just a second or two, but their impact on learning is profound. These spindles seem to protect your sleep from disruption, helping you stay asleep even when there's noise or other disturbances. But more importantly, they're deeply involved in transferring information from your hippocampus, where new memories are first formed, to your cortex, where long-term memories live. People who have more sleep spindles show better memory performance. The quality of your sleep spindles can actually predict how well you'll remember what you learned the day before. They're like the delivery trucks of your brain, shuttling precious cargo from temporary storage to the permanent archive. Learning isn't just about what you do right, though. Mistakes trigger neuroplasticity in ways that correct answers never can. When you get something wrong, when you stumble or fail, your brain receives a powerful error signal. This signal releases chemicals that make your neurons more receptive to change. It's as if mistakes wake your brain up, making it pay closer attention. The confusion, the mismatch between what you expected and what actually happened. This creates the ideal condition for learning. Your brain is designed to learn most effectively at the edge of your ability, where mistakes are frequent. This is why challenging yourself, accepting difficulty, and being willing to fail are so essential. Every mistake is an opportunity for your brain to rewire itself more intelligently. And speaking of brain chemistry, there's something wonderful about the relationship between learning and pleasure. Curiosity releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. When you're genuinely curious about something, when you feel that pull to know more, your brain is literally rewarding you with dopamine. This creates a positive feedback loop. Curiosity triggers dopamine. Dopamine makes learning feel good, and feeling good makes you more curious. This is why passionate learners seem to accelerate their progress. They're not just studying, they're caught in a dopamine-fueled cycle where learning itself becomes intrinsically rewarding. Cultivating curiosity isn't just a nice idea. It's a neurochemical strategy for making your brain more receptive to new information. The emotional context of learning matters in another way too. Emotional salience, the emotional charge of an experience, determines how well you remember it. Your brain is more likely to encode memories that have emotional weight. This is why you remember exactly where you were during important life events, but can't recall what you had for lunch 2 weeks ago. The amygdala, your brain's emotional center, interacts with the hippocampus during emotionally significant experiences, essentially flagging those memories as high priority. This is why storytelling is such a powerful teaching tool. When information is wrapped in emotion, excitement, surprise, even a touch of fear, it sticks. Dry facts fade, stories endure. If you want to remember something, find a way to connect it to emotion, to make it matter to you personally. The environment and state you're in while learning also creates powerful associations. State-dependent learning means you remember information best when you're in the same mental and physical state you were in when you learned it. If you study while feeling calm, you'll recall that information more easily when you're calm again. If you learn something while slightly caffeinated, that caffeine state becomes part of the memory's context. This is why it can be helpful to practice recalling information in varied conditions. It makes the memory more flexible, less dependent on one specific state. But it also explains why returning to the same place, the same mood, or the same routine can suddenly unlock memories you thought you'd forgotten. Finally, something as simple as water affects everything we've discussed. Dehydration shrinks cognitive bandwidth. Even mild dehydration, losing just 1 or 2% of your body's water, impairs attention, memory, and mental performance. Your brain is about 73% water, and it's extremely sensitive to even small changes in hydration. When you're dehydrated, your brain actually has to work harder to accomplish the same tasks. And that extra effort takes up mental resources you could be using for learning. Staying hydrated isn't just about physical health. It's about giving your brain the environment it needs to focus, to remember, to make those chemical changes we started with. Something as simple as drinking enough water can be the difference between a productive learning session and a frustrating one. And with that, we've explored the foundations of how your brain learns. Let these ideas settle as you settle. Let your breathing slow. The next set of facts will be waiting whenever you're ready to drift deeper. Now that we understand how the brain learns, let's explore how to prepare it. These are the subtle adjustments, the small interventions that transform your brain from merely receptive to optimally primed for learning. Let yourself sink a little deeper as we move through these gentle discoveries. Exercise primes the brain in ways that few other activities can match. When you move your body, particularly during aerobic exercise, your brain releases a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Think of BDNF as fertilizer for your neurons. It promotes the growth of new brain cells, strengthens the connections between existing ones, and protects neurons from damage and deterioration. Even a brief bout of exercise, a 20-minute walk, a quick jog, some jumping jacks, floods your brain with BDNF. This surge lasts for hours afterward, creating a window of enhanced neuroplasticity. Your brain becomes more malleable, more ready to form new connections. This is why some of the most successful learners build movement into their study routines. They're not just taking a break from mental work. They're biochemically preparing their brain to absorb information more effectively. The learning that happens after exercise isn't just easier, it's deeper, more durable. Your neurons are literally more capable of changing in response to experience. Interestingly, what you eat or don't eat also influences BDNF levels. Intermittent fasting boosts BDNF production in remarkable ways. When you extend the time between meals, when you give your body a break from constant digestion, something shifts metabolically. Your brain, sensing this mild stress, responds by upregulating protective mechanisms, including the production of BDNF. Fasting for 12 to 16 hours seems to be particularly effective. Many people practice this naturally by simply skipping breakfast, finishing dinner by 7 or 8 in the evening, and not eating again until noon the next day. During this fasted state, your body shifts from burning glucose to burning fat, producing compounds called ketones that your brain uses efficiently for fuel. This metabolic flexibility, combined with elevated BDNF, creates an excellent environment for learning and cognitive performance. Your mind often feels clearer, sharper, more focused during these fasted periods. It's an ancient mechanism, likely evolved during times when our ancestors had to think clearly and learn quickly, even when food was scarce. Of course, there are also specific compounds you can consume that prepare your brain beautifully. The combination of L-theanine and caffeine creates a particularly elegant cognitive state. Caffeine alone provides energy and alertness, but it often comes with jitters, anxiety, or a scattered quality to your focus. L-theanine, an amino acid found naturally in tea, smooths out these rough edges. It promotes relaxation without drowsiness, producing calm alpha brainwaves that are associated with relaxed alertness. When you combine the two, roughly 100 milligrams of caffeine with 200 milligrams of L-theanine, you get the best of both worlds, alert but calm, focused but flexible. This combination enhances attention, working memory, and the ability to switch between tasks smoothly. Many people achieve this balance simply by drinking green tea, which naturally contains both compounds. Others prefer to take them separately to control the ratio precisely. Either way, this pairing creates a cognitive sweet spot that's ideal for learning, especially for tasks that require sustained attention and mental endurance. There's even a way to combine caffeine with sleep for a powerful effect. The coffee nap sounds counterintuitive, but the science is surprisingly clear. Here's how it works. You drink a cup of coffee quickly, then immediately lie down for a 20-minute nap. Caffeine takes about 20 minutes to reach peak levels in your bloodstream. So during those 20 minutes, you're getting the restorative benefits of sleep without the caffeine interfering. When you wake up, the caffeine is just kicking in, amplifying your alertness right as your brain has cleared out some of the adenosine, the chemical that makes you feel tired, through sleep. The result is a level of alertness and mental clarity that exceeds what either coffee or napping alone could provide. People report feeling remarkably refreshed and focused after a coffee nap. It's a small biohack, but it demonstrates how understanding the timing of these interventions can multiply their effectiveness. Temperature, too, can be leveraged to prepare the brain. Cold exposure triggers a cascade of beneficial responses. When you immerse yourself in cold water, or even just take a cold shower, your body releases norepinephrine, the same chemical that's involved in focus and attention. Cold exposure can increase norepinephrine levels by several 100%, creating a state of heightened alertness that can last for hours. Beyond the immediate boost, regular cold exposure improves your resilience to stress, both physical and mental. Your nervous system becomes better at regulating itself, at maintaining calm and focus even under pressure. Some people use cold showers in the morning as a way to jumpstart their day and prime their brain for learning. Others prefer cold plunges after learning sessions to enhance memory consolidation. The cold is uncomfortable, certainly, but that discomfort is part of the mechanism. Your brain adapts, grows stronger, becomes more efficient at managing stress and maintaining focus. Sometimes the preparation for learning is surprisingly simple. Chewing gum, for instance, has been shown to enhance several aspects of cognitive performance. The act of chewing increases blood flow to the brain, delivering more oxygen and glucose to fuel your neurons. It also seems to activate regions of the brain associated with attention and alertness. Studies have found that people who chew gum while learning show improved memory, particularly for sequences and lists. The effect is modest, but real. There's something about the rhythmic motion, the slight increase in arousal, that keeps your mind engaged. It's a small intervention, easy to implement, and for some people, it makes a noticeable difference. The key seems to be chewing during the learning itself, not just before or after, allowing that steady flow of slightly enhanced blood and attention to support the encoding of new information. Your body's position and movement in space also influences your brain's readiness to learn. Vestibular stimulation, activating your balance system, can enhance cognitive function in interesting ways. Your vestibular system, located in your inner ear, tells your brain about your position and movement. When this system is engaged, it activates networks throughout your brain, including areas involved in spatial memory and attention. Simple activities like balancing on one foot, using a balance board, or even gentle rocking can stimulate this system. Some research suggests that vestibular stimulation may be particularly helpful for learning that involves spatial reasoning or physical skills. It makes sense when you think about it. Movement and cognition evolved together. Your brain didn't develop in a stationary body. It developed in a body that moved, balanced, navigated space. Engaging that movement system can wake up cognitive systems that are intertwined with it. The lighting in your environment does more than just let you see. Lighting temperature, the color quality of the light, affects your alertness and learning capacity. Bright blue-white light, similar to daylight, signals to your brain that it's time to be awake and alert. It suppresses melatonin, the hormone that makes you sleepy, and enhances focus. This is ideal for learning that requires sharp attention and quick thinking. Warmer, dimmer light, on the other hand, tells your brain that the day is ending, that it's time to relax. This is better for consolidation, reflection, and creative thinking that doesn't require intense focus. If you're learning something that requires precision and concentration, bright, cool light will serve you well. If you're reviewing material, making connections between ideas, or engaging in creative problem solving, softer, warmer light might be more appropriate. Your brain is exquisitely sensitive to these environmental cues, and you can use them intentionally to guide your cognitive state. There's also a supplement that many people overlook. Creatine supplementation isn't just for athletes and muscle building. Creatine is a compound that helps produce ATP, the energy currency of your cells, and your brain cells need enormous amounts of energy. When you supplement with creatine, typically 3 to 5 grams per day, you're essentially giving your brain a more robust energy reserve. Research has shown that creatine can improve working memory, reduce mental fatigue, and enhance cognitive performance, especially during demanding tasks or when you're sleep deprived. The effect is particularly noticeable in vegetarians and vegans, since creatine is primarily found in meat and fish. But even people who eat meat often see benefits. It's not a dramatic, feel it immediately kind of supplement. It's subtle, building up over days and weeks, quietly making your brain more resilient, more capable of sustained effort. Finally, we come to something that might seem distant from the brain, but is intimately connected. The gut-brain axis is the communication highway between your digestive system and your brain. Your gut contains hundreds of millions of neurons and produces a significant portion of your body's serotonin, the neurotransmitter involved in mood and well-being. The bacteria living in your gut, your microbiome, influence this communication profoundly. They produce compounds that affect brain function, mood, stress response, and even learning and memory. An unhealthy gut microbiome disrupted by poor diet, antibiotics, or chronic stress can impair cognitive function. A healthy, diverse microbiome supports optimal brain performance. You can nurture this axis by eating fermented foods like yogurt, kimchi, and sauerkraut, by consuming prebiotic fibers that feed beneficial bacteria, and by minimizing processed foods and excessive sugar. The health of your gut isn't separate from the health of your mind. They're in constant conversation, and that conversation shapes your capacity to learn. Taking care of your gut is taking care of your brain. These preparations, these small adjustments to how you move, what you consume, how you manage your environment, they all add up. Each one shifts your brain a little closer to its optimal learning state. Together, they create the conditions where learning feels less like struggle and more like flow. Let these ideas rest with you now. Breathe slowly. The next layer of understanding is just ahead, waiting patiently for you to arrive. We've prepared the brain. Now it's time to learn how to harness it, how to guide your attention into that deep, sustained focus where real learning happens. These are the rhythms and tools that help you stay present, engaged, fully absorbed in what you're trying to learn. Let your mind settle into this exploration. Your brain doesn't operate at a constant level of alertness throughout the day. It follows what's called an ultradian rhythm, a natural cycle of energy and focus that repeats roughly every 90 to 120 minutes. During the peak of this cycle, your ability to concentrate is at its highest. Your mind is sharp, distractions fade away, and complex information seems to organize itself almost effortlessly. Then the cycle dips. Your attention wavers, fatigue creeps in, and continuing to push feels increasingly difficult. This isn't a failure of willpower. It's your biology asking for a break. The most effective learners work with this rhythm rather than against it. They structure their learning in blocks of 60 to 90 minutes, then take a real break, 10 to 20 minutes, where they step away completely, let their mind wander, allow the cycle to reset. Trying to push through the dip leads to diminishing returns. You're spending energy but not learning effectively. Respecting the ultradian rhythm means you're always working during your brain's natural windows of peak capacity. The breaks aren't wasted time. They're what make the focus periods possible. Understanding this rhythm transforms how you approach your day, shifting from an exhausting battle against your own attention to a dance with your natural cognitive cycles. And what you do during those breaks matters enormously. Nature walks restore attention in a way that few other activities can. There's something about natural environments, trees, water, open sky, that allows your directed attention to rest and recover. Your directed attention is what you use when you're focusing deliberately on learning, and it's a limited resource. It fatigues with use. But natural environments engage what's called involuntary attention, the kind that happens effortlessly when something gently captures your interest. A bird in a tree, sunlight through leaves, the sound of water moving. This involuntary attention gives your directed attention time to recover. Studies show that even a brief walk in nature, as little as 15 or 20 minutes, can significantly restore your ability to focus afterward. Urban environments don't provide the same benefit. They're full of stimuli that demand directed attention: traffic, signs, navigation. Nature is restorative precisely because it doesn't demand. It simply offers. If you're struggling to maintain focus across multiple learning sessions in a day, the solution might not be more coffee or more willpower. It might be stepping outside, finding some trees, letting your attention rest in something green and growing. When you return to your learning, the soundscape you choose can profoundly affect your ability to enter and maintain focus. Video game soundtracks are particularly effective for creating flow states. These soundtracks are engineered specifically to help players maintain concentration for extended periods. They're designed to be engaging enough to mask distracting ambient noise, but not so complex or emotionally dynamic that they pull your attention away from the task. Video game music tends to be repetitive in a pleasant way, creating a consistent sonic environment that your brain can settle into. It often lacks lyrics, which is important because verbal content in music competes with language-based learning. Games like Minecraft, Journey, or various ambient gaming soundtracks provide hours of focus-friendly audio. The music creates a kind of auditory bubble, a space where your mind can work without constantly being pulled toward other stimuli. Many people find that the right soundtrack transforms their learning sessions, making it easier to drop into concentration and stay there. Sometimes, though, you don't need music at all. White noise and its close relative stochastic resonance can enhance focus and cognitive performance in interesting ways. White noise is a consistent sound that contains all frequencies at equal intensity, like a fan running, or radio static, or rainfall. It masks sudden environmental sounds that would otherwise break your concentration. But there's more happening than just masking. At certain volumes, white noise seems to improve cognitive function directly through a phenomenon called stochastic resonance. This is the counterintuitive idea. that adding the right amount of random noise to a system can actually make the signal clearer, not muddier. In your brain, a low level of noise might help boost weak neural signals above the threshold needed for processing, essentially making your neurons slightly more responsive. The effect is subtle but measurable: improved memory, faster reaction times, better sustained attention. Not everyone responds the same way. Some people find white noise distracting rather than helpful. But for those who respond well, it's like tuning an instrument. The right level of background noise brings your cognitive system into better focus. Focus isn't just about environment and sound, though. Sometimes it's about presence. Body doubling is a simple but remarkably effective technique where you work alongside another person, either in person or virtually. You're not collaborating, not necessarily even working on the same thing. You're simply present with each other while you work. This works especially well for people who struggle with motivation or sustained attention. There's something about another person's presence that anchors you, makes it harder for your mind to drift, creates a gentle accountability. Many people use virtual body doubling now, sitting on a video call with a friend or stranger, cameras on, both working silently on their own tasks. The awareness that someone else is there, that you're part of a shared focus, somehow makes your own focus more stable. It's a borrowed structure. Their presence lends discipline to yours. For tasks that feel overwhelming or tedious when you're alone, body doubling can be the difference between procrastination and progress. It's particularly helpful for people with ADHD, but the benefits extend to anyone who finds that solitude makes focus elusive. And then there's the way you frame the time itself. Parkinson's law states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. If you give yourself 2 hours to complete a task that could be done in 45 minutes, you'll likely take the full 2 hours, not because the task requires it, but because the time is there. Your focus dilutes to fill the space. But when you compress the time available, when you set a tight but realistic deadline, something shifts. Your focus sharpens. You become more decisive, less prone to perfectionism and overthinking. Time compression creates a kind of productive urgency. You're racing against the clock, and that race focuses your attention wonderfully. The key is making the deadline challenging but achievable. Too generous, and you lose the benefit. Too tight, and you create stress that impairs performance. But when you find that sweet spot, enough time to do good work, but not so much that you can afford to meander, your efficiency and focus increase dramatically. You can apply this at any scale. Give yourself 25 minutes instead of an hour. Give yourself 2 days instead of a week. The constraint doesn't limit your learning, it concentrates it. These tools and principles, working with your natural rhythms, restoring attention through nature, curating your sonic environment, borrowing focus from others' presence, and using time strategically, they're all ways of managing the same precious resource, your attention. Deep focus isn't something that happens to you randomly. It's something you can cultivate, shape, and sustain through deliberate choices about when, where, and how you engage with learning. Each of these techniques addresses a different aspect of the challenge: your energy cycles, your need for restoration, your sensitivity to environment, your social nature, your relationship with time. Together, they form a toolkit for focus, a set of options you can reach for depending on what your brain needs in any given moment. Focus is both simpler and more complex than we usually think. Simpler, because it's often just about aligning with how your brain already wants to work. More complex because that alignment requires awareness, experimentation, and a willingness to adjust. What works brilliantly for one person might do nothing for another. The video game soundtrack that helps someone else might distract you. The time compression that sharpens one mind might stress another. This is why learning about focus is useful, but experimenting with focus is essential. You're discovering not just how brains work in general, but how your brain works specifically. And through that discovery, through trying these approaches and noticing what happens, you develop something even more valuable than any single technique. You develop a relationship with your own attention. You start to notice the signs that your focus is fading, that you need a break, that the environment isn't supporting you. You become less frustrated with yourself when concentration feels difficult, because you understand the rhythms and factors at play. You learn to be curious about your attention rather than judgmental of it. That shift alone, from fighting your focus to understanding it, changes everything. Let these ideas about focus drift through your mind now. There's no need to hold them tightly. They'll be there when you need them. These tools for bringing your attention home, for diving deep into learning and staying there, present and absorbed, for as long as the work requires. Breathe easily. The next collection of insights is waiting, patient and ready, whenever you wish to continue. Now we arrive at the principles themselves, the core, truths about how learning actually works most efficiently. These aren't tricks or shortcuts. They're fundamental patterns that emerge again and again when people learn something quickly and well. Let these ideas unfold slowly as you rest. The Pareto principle suggests that roughly 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. In learning, this means that not all knowledge is equally valuable. A small subset of concepts, skills, or facts will give you disproportionate capability. When you're learning a language, for instance, a few hundred of the most common words will allow you to understand the majority of everyday conversation. When you're learning to code, a handful of fundamental patterns will unlock your ability to solve most problems. The art of learning quickly isn't about consuming everything. It's about identifying that vital 20% and focusing there first. This requires stepping back and asking, what are the core concepts? What skills will I use most frequently? What knowledge unlocks the most doors? Once you've built competence in that crucial 20%, the remaining 80% becomes either easier to learn or less necessary to know. Many people approach learning by trying to be comprehensive, working through material sequentially from beginning to end. But the fastest learners identify the high-leverage concepts first, master those, and then fill in the gaps as needed. They're strategic about where they invest their attention. The Pareto principle isn't about being lazy. It's about being intelligent with your limited time and energy. But here's the paradox. While you want to focus on high-leverage material, you also want to make the learning process appropriately difficult. Desirable difficulties are challenges that feel harder in the moment, but produce stronger, more durable learning. When something feels too easy, when information flows into your mind without resistance, it often doesn't stick. Your brain needs a certain level of challenge to encode memories deeply. This is why passive reading is less effective than active retrieval. When you close the book and try to recall what you just read, that effort, the difficulty of pulling the information from memory, strengthens the memory itself. When you space out your practice instead of cramming, the spacing creates difficulty because you have to work harder to remember. When you mix different types of problems instead of practicing the same type repeatedly, the mixing creates difficulty because you have to identify what kind of problem you're facing. All of these difficulties slow you down in the short term. They make learning feel less smooth, but they dramatically improve long-term retention and transfer. The key word is desirable. Not all difficulties help. Difficulties that arise from poor teaching, confusing explanations, or material that's far beyond your current level. These are undesirable difficulties. They frustrate without teaching. Desirable difficulties are challenges that stretch you without breaking you, that require effort, but remain within your capability. Your brain also has particular patterns about what it remembers best. The primacy and recency effects describe how we remember the beginning and end of a learning session more clearly than the middle. When you start learning, your attention is fresh, and those first pieces of information get encoded strongly. That's primacy. As you continue, your attention gradually fatigues, and the middle portion of your session tends to be remembered less well. Then, as you approach the end, your memory improves again. That's recency. The last things you encounter are still active in your mind, not yet displaced by subsequent information. Understanding this pattern lets you structure your learning strategically. Put the most important or difficult material at the beginning and end of your sessions. Use the middle for review or less critical content. Or, better yet, keep your learning sessions relatively short so that more of your time is spent in those primacy and recency zones. Instead of one 3-hour session with a long, poorly remembered middle, consider 3 1-hour sessions, each with strong beginnings and endings. You're not learning less. You're arranging the same learning time to align with how your memory actually works. The speed of your learning also depends on starting at the right level of challenge. The zone of proximal development is the sweet spot between what you can do easily on your own and what's completely beyond your reach. It's the space where you're challenged but capable, where you need to stretch but can still succeed, perhaps with a little help or guidance. Learning is fastest when you're working right at the edge of your current ability. Too easy, and you're not creating the conditions for growth. Your brain isn't adapting because it doesn't need to. Too hard, and you're overwhelmed. You can't find patterns, can't build understanding, and frustration replaces learning. The zone of proximal development is where you're making errors, but not drowning in them, where you're succeeding, but not coasting. This zone shifts constantly as you learn. What was difficult yesterday becomes easy today, and you need to adjust to find the new edge. The fastest learners are constantly seeking this zone, deliberately placing themselves in situations that are just beyond their comfortable reach. They're not reckless, taking on challenges that will crush them, but they're also not timid, sticking only with what they already know. They're calibrating constantly, looking for that place where learning feels like a manageable struggle. How you orient yourself mentally toward this struggle matters too. Process versus outcome focus is about where you direct your attention. An outcome focus is about the result, getting an A, winning the competition, completing the project. A process focus is about the actions themselves, the quality of your practice, the consistency of your effort, the strategies you're using. Research consistently shows that process focus leads to better learning. When you focus on outcomes, you become anxious about results, and that anxiety interferes with learning. You're also more likely to give up when results don't come quickly, because the outcome is all that matters. When you focus on process, you're measuring success differently. Did I practice with full attention? Did I use effective strategies? Did I persist when it was difficult? These are things you can control, and that sense of control reduces anxiety and sustains motivation. Process focus also helps you identify what's working and what isn't. You're paying attention to the learning itself, not just the end product, so you can adjust your approach. Ironically, focusing on process rather than outcomes often leads to better outcomes. But even when it doesn't, it leads to more learning and learning compounds. The person focused on process keeps improving even when specific outcomes don't go their way. As you learn, you often need support structures to help you reach new levels of capability. Scaffolding is temporary support that helps you perform at a higher level than you could alone, with the support gradually removed as you develop competence. Think of how a child learns to ride a bike with training wheels. The training wheels are scaffolding. They allow the child to experience riding, to build confidence and basic skills, without the full challenge of balancing. Then, as balance improves, the training wheels come off. The scaffolding has done its job. In learning, scaffolding might be worked examples that show you how to solve a problem before you try one yourself. It might be a checklist that guides you through a complex process until you've internalized the steps. It might be hints, templates, or coaching. Good scaffolding is responsive. It provides just enough support to keep you in your zone of proximal development, then fades as you grow. Poor scaffolding either provides too much support for too long, making you dependent, or withdraws too quickly, leaving you floundering. When you're learning on your own, you can create your own scaffolding. Use more resources and support early on. Simplify the task at first. Give yourself permission to lean on tools and guides. Then, systematically, remove these supports, testing whether you're ready to stand on your own. Though scaffolding involves accepting some errors, there are situations where preventing errors is actually the better strategy. Errorless learning is an approach where the material is structured so that you almost always respond correctly. This seems to contradict what we said earlier about desirable difficulties and the value of mistakes. And in many contexts it does. Mistakes are valuable for learning. But errorless learning is particularly useful in the early stages of skill acquisition, especially for motor skills or when learning procedures. If you're learning to play a musical instrument and you practice the wrong fingering over and over, you're not just failing to learn the right way. You're actively learning the wrong way. Your brain is encoding the error. It's often better to slow down, use guides, and practice correctly from the start. Once you've established the correct pattern, then you can remove supports and allow errors to refine your performance. Errorless learning is also valuable for building confidence in learners who've experienced a lot of failure. Sometimes people need to experience success, even supported success, to believe that learning is possible for them. The key is knowing when to use this approach. Early stages of procedural learning, situations where errors might be dangerous or discouraging, contexts where wrong patterns are hard to unlearn. These are good candidates for errorless learning. Complex problem solving, conceptual understanding, and later stages of skill refinement. These benefit more from the productive struggle of making and correcting mistakes. Finally, there's a way of thinking that accelerates learning across domains. First principles thinking means breaking something down to its most fundamental truths and reasoning up from there, rather than reasoning by analogy or copying what others have done. When you learn by analogy, you're importing patterns from other contexts. This can be helpful, but it can also limit you to existing solutions. When you reason from first principles, you ask, what do I know to be absolutely true? What are the basic components? What are the constraints? From there, you build up your understanding or solution. This approach takes more mental effort initially. It's slower, but it produces deeper understanding and more innovative thinking. You're not just learning what to do, you're learning why it works, which means you can adapt it, combine it with other knowledge, and apply it in novel situations. First principles thinking is how experts approach unfamiliar problems. They don't panic because they don't recognize the specific situation. They identify the fundamental elements and reason forward. For a learner, this might mean not just memorizing a formula, but understanding where it comes from, what it represents, why it works. It means asking why repeatedly until you hit something genuinely foundational. This depth of understanding makes your knowledge more flexible, more durable, more useful. These principles, focusing on high-leverage material, embracing productive difficulty, working at the right edge of your ability, attending to process, using and removing support strategically, preventing errors when necessary, and thinking from first principles. These aren't separate ideas you apply one at a time. They interact, they inform each other. The Pareto principle helps you decide what to focus on. Desirable difficulties make that focus practice effective. The zone of proximal development tells you how much difficulty is right. Process focus keeps you engaged with the learning journey. Scaffolding and errorless learning support you when needed. First principles thinking ensures your understanding goes deep. Together, they form an integrated approach to learning, a framework that adapts to whatever you're trying to master. And the beautiful thing is, once you understand these principles, you start seeing them everywhere. You recognize when you're outside your zone of proximal development. You notice when something feels too easy and you need more challenge. You catch yourself focusing on outcomes and redirect to process. You identify where scaffolding would help. These principles become tools you can consciously reach for, but also patterns you recognize automatically. Your learning becomes more intentional, more effective, more yours. You're not just passively receiving information. You're actively constructing your own understanding, guided by principles that work with how your brain actually learns. Let these ideas settle now, layering themselves into your understanding. There's no rush. The next set of insights will be there when you're ready, building on this foundation, adding new dimensions to your growing map of how learning works. Breathe deeply. Rest. Let the knowledge integrate. Now we move into the realm of memory itself, the techniques and principles that transform fleeting experiences into lasting knowledge. These are the methods that memory champions use, that students discover when they finally learn how to learn. Let your mind drift through these ideas, absorbing them gently. The single most powerful technique for strengthening memory is surprisingly simple. Retrieval practice means actively recalling information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. When you close your notes and try to remember what you just studied, when you quiz yourself, when you explain concepts without looking at your materials, that's retrieval practice. Every time you successfully pull something from memory, you're not just checking whether you know it, you're strengthening the pathways that lead to that information. You're making it easier to retrieve next time. The effort of retrieval is what builds memory strength. This is why flashcards work when used properly, why teaching others is so effective, why practice tests improve learning more than additional study time. Most people avoid retrieval practice because it feels harder than reviewing notes. It exposes what you don't know, which can be uncomfortable. But that difficulty and discomfort are signs that you're actually learning. Your brain is being forced to reconstruct the information, and that reconstruction process is what creates durable memory. The paradox is that the study method that feels easiest, passive rereading, produces the weakest learning, while the method that feels hardest, active retrieval, produces the strongest. You can even use retrieval before you've learned something. Pre-testing, which means testing yourself on material before you've studied it, seems pointless on the surface. You don't know the answers yet, so you'll get everything wrong. But research shows that the act of attempting to retrieve information, even when you fail, primes your brain to notice and encode that information when you encounter it. It's like your brain is saying, "Oh, here's the answer to that question I couldn't answer earlier." The failed retrieval attempt creates a kind of cognitive curiosity, a gap that your brain wants to fill. When you then study the material, it sticks better because your brain has already identified it as something you need to know. Pre-testing works particularly well with multiple choice questions, even random guessing, before reading a chapter or watching a lecture. Those few minutes of unsuccessful retrieval set up your brain to learn more effectively from whatever comes next. Your brain also has an interesting relationship with unfinished tasks. The Zeigarnik effect is the tendency to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. When you start something but don't finish it, your brain keeps it active in the background, maintaining attention on it, trying to find a way to resolve it. This creates a kind of cognitive tension that enhances memory. You can use this deliberately in learning. Instead of finishing a study session at a natural stopping point, stop in the middle of something. Leave a problem partially solved, a concept partially understood, a question hanging in the air. Your brain will continue processing it unconsciously, and when you return, you'll often find that the material comes back more easily, that insights have emerged during the gap. This technique also makes it easier to resume studying. There's less friction when you know exactly where you left off and what you need to work on next. The unfinished business pulls you back in. As you learn, it's valuable to step back and observe your own thinking. Metacognition is thinking about thinking, awareness of your own cognitive processes. When you notice that you're not understanding something, when you recognize that a particular study strategy isn't working, when you catch yourself getting distracted, that's metacognition. It's the internal observer that monitors and evaluates your learning. Developing strong metacognitive skills makes you a dramatically better learner because you can self-correct in real time. You're not blindly continuing with ineffective strategies. You're noticing what works and what doesn't, adjusting accordingly. Simple metacognitive practices include asking yourself questions during learning. Do I really understand this? Or does it just feel familiar? If I had to explain this to someone else, could I do it? What am I finding difficult and why? Am I focusing on the right things? This internal dialogue transforms passive consumption into active learning. You become both the student and the teacher, constantly checking your own understanding and guiding yourself toward deeper comprehension. One of the most powerful metacognitive techniques is talking through what you're learning. Self-explanation means explaining material to yourself in your own words, describing not just what you're learning, but why it makes sense, how it connects to what you already know. When you encounter a worked example in math, for instance, you don't just read through it. You explain each step to yourself. Why this operation is performed, what it accomplishes, how it moves you toward the solution. This forces you to process the material deeply, to identify gaps in your understanding, to build connections. Self-explanation is effortful, and it slows you down considerably, but it dramatically improves comprehension and retention. You're not just memorizing the surface, you're building an integrated understanding, a mental model that you can apply in new situations. The voice doesn't have to be out loud, though speaking can help. Even internal self-explanation, that running commentary in your mind about what you're learning and why it makes sense, strengthens understanding far beyond passive reading. A related technique is interrogating the material with specific types of questions. Elaborative interrogation means asking why and how questions about what you're learning. Why does this work this way? How does this connect to that? Why is this true? These questions force you to generate explanations, to dig beneath the surface facts to underlying principles and relationships. When you read that a certain historical event happened, you ask why it happened, how different factors contributed, what made it significant. When you learn a scientific fact, you ask why it's true, what mechanisms make it work. This questioning transforms you from a passive recipient of information into an active investigator. You're not accepting claims at face value. You're demanding understanding. And in the process of answering your own questions, even tentatively, you create a richer, more interconnected web of knowledge. The information has more hooks, more connections to other things you know, which makes it easier to remember and more likely to be useful when you need it. Another way to build those connections is through visual organization. Concept mapping is creating diagrams that show relationships between ideas. You write concepts in boxes or circles, then draw lines between them labeled with the nature of the relationship. Unlike linear notes, concept maps show structure, hierarchy, and interconnection. They externalize the network of ideas, letting you see patterns and gaps in your understanding. Creating a concept map requires you to think deeply about how ideas relate to each other, which pieces are central and which are peripheral, what depends on what. This process of spatial and visual organization engages different parts of your brain than verbal processing alone, strengthening memory through multiple encoding channels. Concept maps are particularly useful for complex material with lots of interrelated parts, systems, theories, processes. They help you see the big picture and the details simultaneously, understanding both the forest and the trees. Your working memory, the mental space where you actively think and process, is limited. Miller's law suggests you can hold about 7 items in working memory, though more recent research puts the number closer to 4. This is why phone numbers are broken into chunks, why lists beyond a certain length become overwhelming. But here's the key. A chunk can contain multiple pieces of information if they're organized meaningfully. Chunking is the process of grouping information into larger, organized units. When you're memorizing a string of numbers, you might chunk them as dates or familiar patterns. When you're learning vocabulary, you might chunk words by theme or etymology. Expert chess players remember board positions not by memorizing individual piece locations, but by recognizing patterns, chunks, that they've seen before. The same physical limitation of working memory applies to everyone, but experts have organized their knowledge into larger, more meaningful chunks, so they can hold more total information. For learners, this means actively looking for ways to organize material into meaningful groups. Don't try to remember 20 disconnected facts. Find themes, categories, relationships that let you chunk those 20 facts into 3 or 4 meaningful groups. Your memory capacity hasn't changed, but what you can fit into that capacity has expanded dramatically. Sometimes memory benefits from being spatial and narrative. The memory palace technique, also called the method of Loki, involves associating information you want to remember with locations in a familiar physical space. You mentally walk through your house or a route you know well, and at each location you place a vivid image representing something you want to remember. To recall the information, you take the same mental walk, and the locations trigger the memories. This technique is ancient, used by orators in Greece and Rome to remember long speeches without notes. It works because spatial memory is incredibly strong. You can probably remember the layout of your childhood home in remarkable detail even years later. By anchoring abstract information to physical locations, You leverage that spatial memory. The key is making the images vivid, unusual, or emotionally engaging. The stranger the image, the more memorable it becomes. Memory palaces take some initial effort to construct, but once built, they can hold enormous amounts of information in a retrievable structure. Memory champions use this technique to memorize thousands of digits or the order of shuffled card decks. A related mnemonic system is the peg system, where you have a pre-memorized sequence of pegs, often numbers associated with rhyming words, like 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree. And you hang new information on these pegs through vivid associations. To remember a list of items in order, you create an image linking the first item to bun, the second to shoe, and so on. The pegs stay the same, providing a reliable structure, while what you hang on them changes depending on what you're trying to remember. This system is particularly useful for remembering ordered lists, or for being able to recall what item was at a specific position. Like the memory palace, it requires some upfront investment to memorize the pegs, but once you have them, they become a reusable tool for memory across many contexts. Sometimes the best way to remember something is to create rather than just consume. The drawing effect shows that drawing concepts, even crude drawings, improves memory more than writing notes about those concepts. When you draw something, you're processing it visually, spatially, and motorically all at once. You're making decisions about what's essential, how things relate spatially, what details matter. This deep multimodal processing creates strong memory traces. The drawings don't need to be artistic or beautiful. Simple sketches, diagrams, stick figures, these work just as well. What matters is the act of translating the information into a visual form, which requires understanding and creative engagement. For learners who've always relied only on text-based notes, adding drawing, even simple, quick sketches, can significantly boost retention. The way you engage with information during learning also matters. The production effect demonstrates that you remember information better when you say it aloud, compared to reading it silently. There's something about the act of producing the words, of hearing your own voice, that strengthens memory. It's a form of dual encoding. You're processing the information both visually as you read and auditorily as you speak and hear. Reading aloud also forces you to slow down, to attend to each word rather than skimming. For particularly important information, or for material you're finding difficult to remember, reading it aloud or explaining it aloud to yourself can make a meaningful difference. Memory is also surprisingly connected to your senses beyond the visual and auditory. Olfactory cues, smells, can trigger powerful memories and can be used deliberately in learning. The olfactory bulb, which processes smell, has direct connections to the hippocampus and amygdala, brain regions involved in memory and emotion. This is why certain smells can instantly transport you to a specific time and place. You can use this in learning by associating particular scents with study sessions. Study while burning a specific candle or essential oil, then expose yourself to that same scent before a test or when trying to recall the information. The scent acts as a retrieval cue, helping to bring back the context and content of your learning. The effect is subtle but real, and for some people, it can provide just enough additional retrieval support to make a difference. Finally, distinctiveness improves memory. The von Restorff effect shows that items that stand out from their surroundings are remembered better. If you have a list of words and one is printed in red while the others are black, you'll remember the red one more easily. In learning, this means that making important information distinctive helps it stick. You might highlight key concepts not just by marking them, but by creating unusual associations, by placing them in unexpected contexts, by exaggerating them in some way. The weirder, more emotionally charged, or more humorous your mental image or association, the more likely you'll remember it. This is why memory techniques often emphasize creating bizarre, vivid images. They're not just making the learning process more entertaining. They're leveraging the way your brain naturally prioritizes distinctive information. All these techniques, retrieval, pre-testing, leveraging unfinished business, monitoring your own thinking, explaining and questioning, visualizing relationships, chunking information, using spatial memory, creating multi-sensory experiences, and making things distinctive. They're not equally useful for all material or all people. Part of becoming an effective learner is experimenting with these approaches, noticing which ones resonate with you, which ones work for different types of content. But what they all have in common is that they're active. They require engagement, effort, creativity. They transform you from a passive consumer of information into an active builder of memory and understanding. Let these memory principles rest in your mind now. There's no pressure to remember them all perfectly. Some will stick, some will fade, and that's fine. What matters is that you've been exposed to them, that they're now part of your mental landscape. When you need them, they'll be there, ready to be retrieved, ready to help you learn whatever comes next. Breathe slowly. The journey continues whenever you're ready. We've explored how memory works. Now let's turn to how you actually practice, how you structure your study sessions to align with everything we've learned. These are the methods that separate surface-level exposure from deep, lasting mastery. Let these techniques settle into your awareness. Perhaps the most scientifically validated study technique is spacing your practice over time. Spaced repetition means reviewing information at increasing intervals rather than cramming it all at once. You might review something an hour after first learning it, then a day later, then 3 days later, then a week, then 2 weeks, and so on. Each time you successfully recall the information after a gap, you strengthen the memory more than if you had reviewed it immediately. The spacing creates a desirable difficulty. You have to work harder to retrieve the information because some forgetting has occurred, and that effortful retrieval is what builds long-term retention. Software like Anki automates this process, calculating optimal review intervals based on how well you remember each item. But you can implement spaced repetition manually too, simply by building review sessions into your schedule at increasing intervals. The key is fighting the urge to mass practice, to cram everything into one session. Spacing feels less efficient in the moment because you're forgetting between sessions. But that forgetting is actually part of what makes the learning stick. You're teaching your brain that this information needs to be retained long-term, not just held briefly for a test and then discarded. Even within a single study session, spacing matters. The gap effect shows that taking breaks during practice, allowing small gaps between repetitions, improves learning compared to continuous practice. If you're trying to memorize something, spacing out your attempts across the session with brief activities in between works better than repeating it over and over without pause. Those gaps, even just a minute or two, give your brain time to process, to consolidate what you just practiced. The memory trace needs time to stabilize. Constant repetition without breaks doesn't give that consolidation time. It's like trying to paint multiple coats without letting each one dry first. The layers blur together rather than building up. Short breaks, moments where you shift attention to something else, allow each learning episode to solidify before you add the next one. How you sequence different types of material also matters enormously. Interleaving means mixing different types of problems or topics within a single study session, rather than studying one topic completely before moving to the next. If you're studying math, instead of doing 20 problems of the same type, you do a few of one type, then a few of another type, then back to the first, mixing them up. This feels harder and messier than blocked practice, where you do all the same type together. But interleaving forces you to discriminate between problem types, to identify which approach each problem requires. This builds flexibility and transfer. With blocked practice, you don't have to think about what kind of problem you're facing. You just apply the same method 20 times. Interleaving makes you think, makes you choose, and that cognitive engagement deepens learning. The performance during practice is worse with interleaving, which is why it feels less effective. But performance on later tests is dramatically better. You're learning not just how to solve each type of problem, but when to use each approach, which is what matters in real-world application. The comparison between blocked and random practice extends beyond academics. In motor learning, practicing a skill in a predictable, repetitive way feels smooth, but produces less learning than random, varied practice. If you're learning tennis serves, hitting the same type of serve 50 times in a row is blocked practice. It feels good. You get into a rhythm. Your performance improves within that session. But mixing different types of serves, flat, slice, kick, in random order is more effective for long-term skill development. The unpredictability forces your brain to stay engaged, to adapt, to learn the skill more deeply, rather than just memorizing one specific repetition pattern. The general principle is that practice that feels smooth and error-free during training often produces brittle learning that doesn't transfer. Practice that feels difficult and inconsistent during training produces robust learning that holds up under varied conditions. Related to this is the idea of building variability into practice deliberately. Variability in practice means exposing yourself to different versions, contexts, or examples of what you're learning. If you're learning a concept, you encounter it through different problems, different explanations, different applications. If you're learning a physical skill, you practice it under different conditions, different speeds, different positions, different environmental factors. This variability prevents you from learning something too narrowly, tied too specifically to one context. It builds flexible knowledge that transfers. The key is that the variability should be relevant. Different versions of the same underlying pattern or principle, not just random differences. When you practice with variability, your brain has to extract the deeper commonality beneath the surface differences, and that extraction process creates more generalizable learning. Sometimes the best way to understand something complex is to move between different levels of detail. Whole part whole learning means starting with an overview of the complete skill or concept, then zooming in to practice specific parts, then returning to the whole to integrate everything. You might watch an expert perform a complex skill to get a sense of the overall flow, then practice individual components, then attempt the full skill again with your new understanding of the parts. This approach gives you context. You understand why each part matters because you've seen the whole. It prevents you from getting lost in details without understanding how they fit together. Many educational materials naturally follow a part-to-whole structure, teaching details first and only later showing how they combine. But starting with the big picture, even before you can perform it yourself, orients your learning. You know where you're headed. The parts make more sense because you understand their role in the whole. For certain types of learning, especially complex procedures or sequences, there's an efficient way to build competence. Backward chaining means starting from the end and working backward. If you're learning a multi-step process, you first master the final step with the earlier steps already completed for you. Then you learn the second to last step, finishing with the final step you've already mastered. You work backward, eventually performing the entire sequence yourself. This works particularly well because each practice session ends with success. You're always completing the task, always experiencing the satisfaction of finishing. This builds confidence and motivation. Forward chaining, starting from the beginning, means you're often stopping before completion, which can feel less rewarding. Backward chaining is used effectively in teaching complex skills like tying shoes to children or multi-step procedures in professional training. The end is always in sight, always achievable, and that psychological support helps maintain engagement through the learning process. Some learning is perceptual. It's about developing your ability to see, hear, or sense patterns that experts recognize automatically. Perceptual learning involves training your perceptual systems to discriminate subtle differences or detect meaningful patterns. Radiologists learn to see tumors that others miss. Musicians learn to hear subtle differences in pitch or timing. Wine experts detect flavor notes that escape casual drinkers. This learning happens through exposure to many examples with feedback. You see many X-rays trying to spot anomalies with immediate feedback about whether you were right. You hear many musical intervals, identifying them, learning what each sounds like. The repetition with feedback tunes your perceptual system. What's initially invisible or inaudible gradually becomes obvious. This type of learning often doesn't feel like learning. You're just looking or listening repeatedly. But your perceptual system is adapting, becoming more sensitive, more discriminating. For any field that involves pattern recognition, dedicated perceptual training can dramatically accelerate development of expertise. A powerful technique for deepening understanding is studying contrasts. Contrastive analysis means deliberately comparing similar things to understand what makes them different, or comparing correct and incorrect examples to understand what makes something right. You might study two solutions to the same problem, one elegant, one clumsy, and analyze what distinguishes them. You might compare two historical events that seem similar but had different outcomes, investigating what factors mattered. You might look at your own work before and after revision, identifying what improved. Contrast makes features salient that would otherwise remain invisible. When you see only correct examples, you might not notice which features are essential. When you see correct and incorrect examples side by side, the critical differences become clear. This comparative process builds discriminative understanding. You're not just learning what to do, but why and what happens when you deviate. The understanding is more nuanced, more transferable. For skills that need to become automatic, where speed and accuracy both matter, there's a specific practice format. SAFMEDS stands for Say All Fast Minute Everyday Shuffle. It's a flashcard practice method where you go through a deck as quickly as possible for 1 minute, saying the answer to each card aloud, then shuffling and repeating. The emphasis is on building fluency. Fast, accurate responding without hesitation. This works for any learning where you need automatic retrieval, math facts, vocabulary, medical terminology, anything that should become second nature. The daily practice builds consistency. The 1 minute timing keeps practice sessions short and sustainable. The shuffling prevents you from memorizing order rather than content. The saying aloud adds production effect benefits. And tracking your rate, how many cards you get through correctly in a minute, provides clear feedback on your developing fluency. It's not the right method for everything, but for foundational knowledge that needs to become automatic, SAVMETS provides a simple, effective structure. The time of day when you practice can matter in unexpected ways. Decision fatigue timing refers to the insight that your ability to make decisions, to exercise self-control, to engage in effortful thinking diminishes throughout the day as you use it. Early in the day, your cognitive resources are relatively fresh. Later, after making many decisions and exerting mental effort, those resources are depleted. This means that challenging learning that requires deep focus and difficult decisions, is often best done early in your day when your mental energy is highest. Save easier, more mechanical practice for later when you're more fatigued. There are individual differences here. Some people are night owls who peak later, but the general principle holds. Your capacity for hard thinking is a resource that depletes and replenishes on a daily cycle. Practice the hardest, most important material when that resource is most available to you. Finally, there's an approach to learning physical skills that works with natural movement patterns. The constraint-led approach means creating practice environments that guide learners toward effective solutions through constraints, rather than through explicit instruction. Instead of telling someone exactly how to move, you set up the task in a way that makes certain movements more successful. Want someone to develop a better tennis swing? Don't give them 20 verbal instructions. Instead, adjust the height of the net, the distance to the target, the type of ball, creating conditions where a good swing naturally emerges. The constraints channel exploration toward effective patterns. This approach respects that there's often more than one right way to perform a skill, that individual differences in body proportions and strengths mean optimal technique varies, and that people learn movement patterns best through exploration rather than imitation. The coach's job becomes designing practice environments that afford the right discoveries, then gradually adjusting constraints as competence develops. This creates more adaptable, robust skills because learners have explored the movement space and understand implicitly how to adapt to changing conditions. These practice methods, spacing your repetitions, mixing your topics, varying your conditions, moving between whole and parts, building backward, training perception, using contrast, building fluency, practicing when you're fresh, and learning through structured exploration. They're different tools for different jobs. The art is knowing which to use when. Some material needs spaced repetition, some needs interleaving, some needs perceptual training. Often, you'll combine multiple approaches. You might use spaced repetition for core concepts, while interleaving different problem types, while varying the conditions of practice. The methods aren't mutually exclusive. They're complementary, each addressing different aspects of how learning becomes permanent, flexible, and useful. And as you learn these methods, as you experiment with them in your own practice, you're not just learning how to study, you're learning how to design your own learning experiences. You're becoming an architect of your own development, able to look at any skill or body of knowledge and construct a practice approach that will efficiently move you from novice to competent to skilled. That capability, knowing how to learn, might be more valuable than any specific thing you learn. It's the meta skill that makes all other learning possible. Rest now in this knowledge. Let it integrate with everything that came before. The foundation is laid. The practices are clear. What remains is simply to apply them, to see them work in your own experience, to make them yours. Breathe easily. More insights await. But there's no rush. Learning is patient. Understanding unfolds in its own time. Physical skills occupy a special place in learning. They engage your body, your senses, your nervous system in ways that purely cognitive learning doesn't. But the principles that accelerate physical learning are often surprising, sometimes counterintuitive. Let these ideas flow through you gently as you rest. One of the most remarkable discoveries is that you can improve physical skills without moving at all. Mental practice, also called motor imagery, means vividly imagining yourself performing a skill. You see yourself from the inside, feeling the movements, the balance, the timing. You run through the sequence in your mind with as much sensory detail as possible. Research shows that mental practice alone produces measurable improvement in physical skills, and combining mental practice with physical practice is more effective than physical practice alone. This works because the same neural pathways involved in actual movement are activated during vivid mental rehearsal. Your motor cortex fires, your cerebellum engages, the neural patterns associated with the skill are strengthened even without your body moving. Elite athletes use mental practice extensively. A gymnast might mentally rehearse a routine hundreds of times, feeling each movement, each transition. A surgeon might mentally rehearse a complex procedure before entering the operating room. The key is making the mental practice detailed and vivid. Vague daydreaming doesn't work. You need to imagine with precision. The feeling of your muscles contracting, the visual perspective, even the sounds and other sensory details. The more realistic the mental simulation, the more your brain treats it like actual practice. Your brain has special cells that help you learn through observation. Mirror neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. This is why watching skilled performers is valuable for learning. Your brain is partially simulating their movements, activating many of the same neural patterns you'd use if you were moving yourself. This is passive mental practice happening automatically, but you can make it more effective by watching actively, with intention. When you observe an expert, focus on the specific movements. Imagine how they feel. Anticipate what comes next. Don't just watch passively. Engage your mirror neuron system deliberately. Some research suggests that watching videos at slightly slower speeds helps with learning because you can process the movements more carefully. The mirror neurons give you a head start when you then attempt the skill yourself. Your brain has already begun forming the neural representation through observation. This is why demonstration is such a powerful teaching tool, and why surrounding yourself with skilled practitioners accelerates your own development. You're not just getting inspiration, you're getting neural templates. Once you've developed basic competence in a skill, there's value in practicing beyond the point where you can reliably perform it. Overlearning means continuing to practice after you've achieved proficiency. This seems wasteful. Why keep practicing something you already know? But overlearning serves important purposes. It makes the skill more automatic, reducing the cognitive load required to perform it. It makes the skill more resistant to stress, fatigue, and pressure. Under normal conditions, your current level of competence might be adequate, but when you're tired, nervous, or distracted, performance degrades. Overlearning creates a buffer. You've built the skill to a level above what you typically need, so even when performance drops, you're still competent. This is why musicians practice scales far beyond basic competence, why athletes drill fundamentals endlessly, why emergency responders train basic procedures until they can perform them flawlessly under extreme stress. The overlearning creates automaticity and resilience. The skill becomes so deeply ingrained that it emerges reliably even under adverse conditions. Where you direct your attention during practice profoundly affects learning. External attentional focus means focusing on the effect of your movement on the environment rather than on the movement itself. If you're throwing a ball, you focus on the target, not on your arm motion. If you're balancing, you focus on keeping a point stable, not on your body position. This contrasts with internal focus, where you attend to your body parts and how they're moving. Extensive research shows that external focus produces better learning and performance than internal focus. When you focus externally, you allow your motor system to self-organize more naturally. You're specifying the goal and letting your nervous system figure out how to achieve it. Internal focus, attending to your specific body parts and movements, actually interferes with the automatic control processes that coordinate movement. It's like consciously thinking about each step while walking. The attention disrupts rather than helps. There are exceptions. Very early in learning, some internal focus might help you understand what movements you're trying to make, and correcting specific technical flaws might require temporary internal attention. But in general, as soon as possible, shift your attention externally. Focus on what you're trying to achieve in the world, not on your body achieving it. The quality of sensory feedback during practice matters immensely. Proprioceptive-enriched training means creating practice conditions that enhance your awareness of body position, movement, and force. Proprioception is your sense of where your body is in space, how your limbs are positioned, how much force you're applying. Rich proprioceptive feedback accelerates motor learning. This might mean practicing with your eyes closed to heighten other senses. It might mean using unstable surfaces that require more active balance and body awareness. It might mean deliberately varying the weight, texture, or size of equipment to force your nervous system to adapt and pay attention. The instability and variation prevent you from settling into one fixed pattern. Your proprioceptive system stays engaged, continuously gathering information and refining control. This creates more adaptable, robust skills. When you then return to normal, stable conditions, performance is enhanced because your nervous system has learned to control movement with greater precision and awareness. Physical movement isn't separate from cognitive learning. They can be integrated powerfully. Total physical response is a language learning method, but the principle applies more broadly. You learn new information by physically acting it out. When learning vocabulary, you don't just repeat words, you perform actions that represent their meaning. The physical engagement helps encode the information more deeply, creating stronger, more multisensory memories. This works beyond language too. Acting out historical events, physically modeling mathematical concepts, using gestures while learning. All of these leverage the connection between body and mind. Your brain evolved in a body that moved, and movement remains a powerful channel for learning. Children naturally learn through physical exploration and play. Adults often abandon this, trying to learn purely through abstract symbols and language. But reintroducing movement, even simple gestures or manipulations, can significantly enhance learning. The movement creates additional neural pathways to the information, makes it more concrete, more embodied, more memorable. For language learning specifically, there's a technique that accelerates fluency remarkably. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and immediately repeating what they say, matching their rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation as closely as possible. You're speaking simultaneously with the recording, or just a fraction of a second behind. This is challenging at first because you're processing meaning, pronunciation, and rhythm all at once while producing speech. But this is exactly why it works. Shadowing integrates listening and speaking, comprehension and production. It trains your mouth and ear together. It forces you to internalize the rhythm and melody of the language, not just individual words. Native level fluency isn't just about knowing words and grammar. It's about the musicality, the flow, the physical patterns of speech. Shadowing builds these directly. You start with slower, simpler material, shadowing children's shows or basic lessons, gradually progressing to normal speed native content. The technique is intense, requiring full concentration, but even 15 to 20 minutes of daily shadowing produces noticeable improvement in pronunciation, listening comprehension, and speaking fluency. You're not just learning the language intellectually, you're training your speech system to produce it naturally. These approaches to physical learning, mental rehearsal, learning through observation, practicing beyond competence, focusing externally, enriching sensory feedback, integrating movement with cognitive learning, and shadowing for language. They all recognize that physical skills aren't just about your muscles. They're about your nervous system, your perceptual systems, your ability to coordinate sensation and action. The body is intelligent. It learns through experience, through feedback, through repetition. But that learning can be accelerated dramatically when you understand how to structure practice, where to direct attention, how to create the conditions for rapid neural adaptation. Physical learning also has a different feel than purely cognitive learning. There's often a nonverbal quality to it. You might not be able to articulate exactly what you're doing, but your body knows. You can feel when a movement is right, even before you fully understand it intellectually. This implicit knowledge, this bodily intelligence, is valuable. Trust it. Many learners of physical skills make the mistake of over-intellectualizing, trying to understand every detail consciously before attempting the movement. But sometimes you need to just move, to feel, to let your nervous system explore and discover. The understanding often comes after the physical competence, not before. Your body learns the pattern, and later your mind learns to articulate what your body already knows. This is why practice, actual physical repetition with attention and variation, remains irreplaceable in motor learning. You can accelerate it with mental practice, with careful observation, with smart structuring. But ultimately, your nervous system needs actual experience producing and controlling movement. The neural pathways need to fire in the actual context of real action, real sensory feedback, real consequences. This doesn't mean mindless repetition. Mindful, varied, intelligently structured practice is far superior to mechanical drilling. But the physical experience is essential. Your body must move, must make mistakes, must feel the difference between attempts, must gradually refine control through repeated engagement with the task. And as you develop physical skills, you often discover something wonderful. The skills begin to feel effortless, automatic. What initially required intense concentration happens without thought. Your body simply knows what to do. This is the goal of motor learning. Not conscious control, but unconscious competence. The skill becomes integrated into your movement repertoire so deeply that you don't have to think about it anymore. This frees your conscious mind to focus on strategy, creativity, expression, higher levels of performance that become possible only when the fundamentals are automatic. The beginner thinks about each movement. The intermediate performer executes with conscious control. The expert simply acts, and the skill unfolds naturally, leaving consciousness free to engage with more subtle dimensions of performance. Let these insights about physical learning rest in your body now, not just your mind. Feel your breath, the weight of your body at rest, the gentle sensations of being alive in a physical form. This body of yours is capable of extraordinary learning, of developing skills you can barely imagine now. All it needs is intelligent practice, patient repetition, and the understanding that physical learning is not separate from mental learning. They're two aspects of the same integrated system, your nervous system, learning to engage more skillfully with the world. Rest now. More understanding awaits, but your body already knows how to rest, how to restore, how to prepare for what comes next. Trust it. Now we enter territory that might seem unusual, techniques that exist at the edges of conventional study methods. These are the specialized accelerators, the approaches that leverage unexpected dimensions of how your mind and body interact with learning. Let yourself drift through these fascinating possibilities. Your brain processes information through multiple channels, and using more than one at a time creates stronger learning. Dual coding means representing information both verbally and visually. When you learn something, you don't just read or hear words about it. You also create or view images, diagrams, or spatial representations. The combination of verbal and visual encoding creates two different memory traces, two different pathways to the same information. This redundancy makes the memory more robust and more easily retrievable. If one pathway is blocked or weak, the other provides an alternative route. This is why textbooks with good diagrams are more effective than pure text. Why teachers who draw while explaining help students remember better. Why creating your own sketches of concepts, even crude ones, enhances learning beyond just taking verbal notes. The two codes support each other. The visual representation makes abstract concepts more concrete. The verbal description adds precision and context to images. Together, they create a richer, more complete understanding than either could alone. When you're studying, actively look for ways to engage both codes. If you have words, create pictures. If you have pictures, describe them in words. Translate back and forth between the two modes of representation. Your brain's capacity is limited, but the world offers essentially unlimited storage. Cognitive offloading means using external tools to reduce the mental burden of remembering and thinking. When you write a to-do list, you're offloading the task of remembering those items from your brain to paper. When you use a calculator, you're offloading arithmetic. When you create a concept map on a whiteboard, you're offloading the work of holding multiple relationships in mind simultaneously. This frees up your limited working memory and attention for higher level thinking. The strategy isn't about being lazy or avoiding mental work. It's about being strategic with your finite cognitive resources. Instead of using your brain to remember everything, you use external tools for storage and simple operations, reserving your brain for analysis, synthesis, creativity, things tools can't do. Effective learners offload aggressively. They use notes, diagrams, apps, reminders, checklists. They don't try to keep everything in their heads. This might seem like it would make their memory weaker, and in some narrow sense it might, but it makes their overall cognitive performance dramatically stronger, because they're always working at the right level of complexity, supported by external scaffolding that extends their capabilities. Even simple physical movements can enhance learning in unexpected ways. Hand gestures while learning or explaining material improve both your own understanding and others' comprehension. When you gesture, you're creating a spatial, physical representation of abstract ideas. This engages motor systems and spatial reasoning in addition to verbal processing. The gestures also slow down your speech slightly, giving you more time to think and allowing listeners more time to process. Children naturally gesture while learning, and those who gesture more tend to learn better. Adults often suppress this natural tendency, but bringing it back enhances learning. The gestures don't need to be elaborate or formal. Simple movements that represent concepts, pointing to indicate direction or sequence, using your hands to show size or relationships, tracing patterns in the air. These all help. They externalize your thinking, making it visible and physical. This helps you notice gaps in your understanding. If you can't figure out how to gesture something, you probably don't understand it as clearly as you thought. The gesture forces precision, and for observers, gestures provide additional information channels beyond your words, helping them build their own understanding of what you're explaining. As you learn, one of your goals should be building knowledge that transfers. Transfer of learning means applying what you learned in one context to a different context. This is the ultimate test of understanding. Many people can solve problems very similar to ones they've practiced, but struggle when the context shifts even slightly. Deep transfer requires understanding principles, not just memorizing procedures. It requires practicing in varied contexts, so your knowledge isn't tied to one specific situation. It requires abstracting the underlying structure from specific examples. To build transferable knowledge, you need to explicitly think about connections. How does this relate to other things you know? What's the general principle here that applies beyond this specific case? Where else might this be useful? These questions force you to extract the generalizable essence. You're not just learning a specific fact or procedure. You're learning a pattern, a principle, a way of thinking that can be deployed in many situations. The learning takes longer initially because you're doing this deeper processing, but the result is knowledge that's far more valuable because it extends beyond the narrow context where you first encountered it. Not all learning happens consciously. Implicit learning is knowledge acquisition that occurs without conscious awareness or intention. Your brain is constantly detecting patterns, regularities, relationships in your environment. Much of this happens below the level of conscious thought. You learn the grammatical structure of your native language implicitly as a child, through exposure, without anyone teaching you rules explicitly. You learn social norms, physical intuitions, aesthetic preferences largely through implicit processes. This implicit learning continues throughout life. You can leverage it deliberately by exposing yourself to rich, structured environments, even when you're not actively studying. Listen to music in a language you're learning, even in the background while doing other things. Surround yourself with examples of good writing if you want to improve your prose. Watch skilled performers even when you're not trying to analyze their technique. Your implicit learning systems are absorbing patterns, building intuitions, creating knowledge that will later surface when you need it. This doesn't replace deliberate practice, but it supplements it powerfully. The combination of explicit, conscious study and rich, implicit exposure creates faster, deeper learning than either alone. After intensive learning or practice, your brain needs specific types of rest. NSDR, which stands for non-sleep deep rest, refers to practices that put your brain into a deeply relaxed state similar to certain sleep stages, but while you're still awake. This includes things like yoga nidra, specific meditation practices, and certain breathing protocols. In these states, your brain waves slow, your nervous system shifts into parasympathetic mode, and processes similar to those that occur during sleep begin to activate. Memory consolidation, neural restoration, and integration of learning all happen during NSDR. A brief session of 10 to 30 minutes can significantly enhance retention of what you studied just before. It also reduces stress and mental fatigue, making subsequent learning more effective. NSDR is particularly valuable after intense learning sessions when your brain is saturated. Instead of pushing through or taking a normal break, you enter this deep rest state, allowing your nervous system to process and consolidate. Athletes use NSDR to enhance skill consolidation after training. Students can use it to lock in material after study sessions. The practice requires some learning. You can't just instantly drop into deep rest. But guided audio tracks for Yoga Nidra or NSDR protocols are widely available and can teach you the practice relatively quickly. There's also a particular state of consciousness that can be leveraged for learning. Hypnagogic learning refers to the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, that drowsy, dreamlike phase as you're falling asleep or just waking up. In this state, your brain is highly receptive to suggestion and your thinking is more fluid, making unusual connections more readily. Some learners use this state deliberately, reviewing key concepts or problems just as they're falling asleep, allowing their hypnagogic mind to process them. Others keep a notebook by their bed to capture insights or solutions that arise in this state. The hypnagogic state is characterized by theta brainwaves associated with creativity, memory integration, and access to unconscious material. It's a state where rigid, logical thinking gives way to more associative, dreamlike processing. This can help with problems that require creative solutions or seeing connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. The challenge is that the hypnagogic state is brief and you can't force it. But if you pay attention to these transition periods, treating them as valuable thinking time rather than just dead space between waking and sleeping, you may find they contribute meaningfully to your learning process. Taking this even further, some people use lucid dreaming rehearsal as a practice tool. Lucid dreaming means becoming aware that you're dreaming while still in the dream, which gives you some degree of control over the dream content. In a lucid dream, you can practice skills, rehearse presentations, explore scenarios, all within the dream space. Because the brain is highly active during REM sleep when most vivid dreams occur, and because the neural patterns of dreaming can resemble those of waking experience, practicing in lucid dreams may provide genuine learning benefits. Athletes have reported practicing complex movements in lucid dreams and finding improvement in waking performance. Musicians have rehearsed difficult passages. Public speakers have delivered presentations. The research on this is still emerging, and lucid dreaming is a skill that takes considerable time to develop. Most people need weeks or months of practice before they can lucid dream reliably. But for those who develop the ability, it offers a fascinating expansion of practice time. You're essentially practicing while you sleep, using the dream state as a simulation environment where you can explore and rehearse without physical limitations or consequences. These specialized accelerators, dual coding, cognitive offloading, gesture, transfer focus, implicit exposure, deep rest protocols, hypnagogic processing, and dream practice. They operate at the boundaries of conventional learning science. Some are well established, backed by decades of research. Others are more speculative, emerging from practices that work for some people, but aren't yet fully understood scientifically. This is appropriate territory for exploration and experimentation. Not everything will work for everyone. Lucid dreaming might be transformative for one person and completely inaccessible to another. NSDR might profoundly help someone while leaving another person feeling it was just a nice nap. The invitation here is to remain open, to experiment thoughtfully. Try dual coding systematically and notice whether your attention improves. Experiment with offloading more aggressively and see if your thinking becomes clearer. Start gesturing while you study and observe whether understanding deepens. Pay attention to those drowsy transition moments and see if insights emerge. The point isn't to adopt every technique. It's to expand your repertoire to know that these options exist, to have more tools available when conventional approaches aren't quite enough. Learning is ultimately a personal journey. You're discovering not just how to learn in general, but how you specifically learn best. You're building a personalized system of techniques and practices that work with your particular brain, your life circumstances, your goals. Some of what works for you will be conventional, well established. Some might be unconventional, even weird. That's fine. What matters is that it works, that it helps you achieve your learning goals efficiently and enjoyably. And perhaps most importantly, these specialized techniques remind us that learning engages the whole system, conscious and unconscious, waking and sleeping, mind and body, internal processing and external support. You're not just a brain in a jar absorbing information. You're an embodied, embedded organism with multiple systems all contributing to learning. The more you can engage all of these systems, the more channels you open for information to flow and consolidate, the more robust and efficient your learning becomes. Rest into this fuller understanding now. You don't need to hold every detail. Let them settle. Let them become part of your general awareness. When you need a specific technique, it will be there, available to recall or rediscover. For now, simply rest in the knowledge that learning is richer, more multifaceted, more accessible than you might have thought. More insights are coming, but they can wait. Breathe slowly. Be at peace. As we've explored what accelerates learning, it's equally important to understand what derails it. These are the subtle traps, the misconceptions, the well-intentioned approaches that actually hinder progress. Understanding what not to do can be just as valuable as knowing what to do. Let these cautionary insights settle into your awareness. When you learn new information, it doesn't just sit peacefully alongside everything else you know. Sometimes new learning interferes with old. Retroactive interference occurs when newly learned information makes it harder to recall something you learned earlier. If you study Spanish vocabulary and then immediately study French vocabulary, the French words can interfere with your ability to recall the Spanish ones. The newer memories compete with the older ones, especially when they're similar. This is why cramming multiple subjects back to back, especially related subjects, can be counterproductive. The information gets tangled. Your brain confuses which facts belong to which context. To minimize retroactive interference, you want to space different subjects apart, ideally with meaningful breaks between them. If you must study similar material in sequence, at least make the context as different as possible. Study in different locations, at different times of day, using different formats. The contextual differences help your brain keep the memories separate. You're creating distinct storage locations rather than trying to pile everything into the same mental space. Sleep is particularly effective at protecting memories from interference, which is another reason why spacing learning across days with sleep between sessions is so powerful. The sleep allows memories to consolidate before you add new, potentially interfering information. Sometimes the best thing you can do for learning is to stop actively trying. The incubation effect describes how taking a break from a problem often leads to sudden insight when you return to it. You struggle with something, make no progress, feel stuck. You walk away, do something completely different, maybe even forget about the problem entirely. Then, later, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, the solution appears seemingly out of nowhere. This happens because your unconscious mind continues processing even when your conscious attention moves elsewhere. The break allows you to escape mental ruts, to stop perseverating on ineffective approaches. When you return, you see the problem with fresh eyes. Different neural pathways activate. Connections that weren't available during your focus struggle suddenly become accessible. This is why sleeping on a problem is genuinely useful advice, not just a way to procrastinate. During the break, especially during sleep, your brain is reorganizing information, making new connections, approaching the problem from different angles without the constraints of your conscious, effortful thinking. To leverage incubation, you need to first engage deeply with the problem. The incubation period isn't a substitute for effort. It's something that happens after effort. You work on something until you're genuinely stuck. Then you deliberately step away, trusting that the unconscious processing will continue. When you return, you often find that what seemed impossible has become surprisingly manageable. One of the most persistent myths in education is that people have different learning styles and should receive instruction matched to their style. You've probably heard this. Some people are visual learners, others are auditory learners, some are kinesthetic. The idea is appealing and intuitive, but decades of research have failed to find any evidence that matching instruction to supposed learning styles improves learning. The learning styles myth persists despite being scientifically unsupported. What actually matters is matching the teaching method to the content. Visual subjects like geometry are best learned visually by everyone. Auditory subjects like music are best learned auditorially by everyone. Physical skills are best learned through physical practice by everyone. Yes, people have preferences. Some prefer reading to listening, for instance, and people certainly vary in their abilities. But there's no evidence that matching instruction to preferred style improves outcomes. In fact, believing in learning styles can be harmful. It might lead people to avoid learning methods that feel uncomfortable but are actually more effective. It might give people an excuse for poor performance. I'm not an auditory learner, so I can't learn from lectures. The reality is that effective learning usually requires engaging with material in multiple ways, regardless of your preference. You need to read about it, hear about it, practice it, discuss it. The combination of multiple modes is more effective than any single mode, regardless of preference. Don't let the learning styles myth limit your approach. Be willing to engage with material in whatever way is most effective for that particular content, even if it's not your preferred mode. As you learn, especially from teachers or books, you may encounter something called the expert blind spot. Experts in a field often struggle to teach beginners because they've forgotten what it's like to not know. The knowledge that once required conscious effort has become automatic, chunked, intuitive. When experts try to explain, they often skip steps that seem obvious to them, but are completely opaque to the beginner. They use jargon without realizing it's jargon. They fail to recognize which parts are difficult and which are easy. They remember their own learning journey inaccurately, forgetting how long it took and how many times they struggled. This creates a gap between expert instruction and novice need. As a learner, recognizing this helps you be less frustrated when expert explanations don't make sense. It's not that you're incapable, it's that the expert has lost touch with the beginner's perspective. You need to find resources created by people who remember the beginner's struggle, or you need to be very assertive about asking for clarification, for additional examples, for slower explanations. As you advance in your own learning, you need to be aware of this blind spot developing in yourself. When you try to help others learn something you now know well, consciously remember your own early struggles. Slow down. Explain the steps you now do automatically. Check frequently for understanding. Don't assume anything is obvious. The expert blind spot is a natural consequence of expertise, but awareness of it helps both in learning from experts and in eventually teaching others effectively. there's a practice technique that seems logical but is actually counterproductive. Negative practice means deliberately practicing errors or ineffective techniques to learn what not to do. The idea is that by experiencing the wrong way, you'll better understand and appreciate the right way. In reality, negative practice often just reinforces the wrong patterns. Your nervous system learns what you practice, and it doesn't always discriminate well between practicing something to remember it versus practicing something to avoid it. If you repeatedly practice poor form in a physical skill, even with the intention of learning what not to do, you're encoding that poor form. The neural pathways for the incorrect movement are being strengthened. This is particularly problematic for motor skills, where incorrect patterns can become deeply ingrained and difficult to unlearn. There are limited exceptions, sometimes contrasting one correct method with one incorrect method. Once can highlight the differences, but repeated practice of errors, extended time spent on incorrect techniques, this backfires. Your time is better spent practicing correct patterns with variation. If you need to understand what makes something correct, study the contrast conceptually or watch others make errors. But don't make the errors yourself repeatedly. Your practice time is precious. Spend it encoding what you want to remember, not what you want to avoid. These mistakes, letting new learning interfere with old, not taking breaks when you're stuck, limiting yourself based on learning style myths, struggling alone with expert materials, or practicing errors, they're all subtle. They don't announce themselves. You might not realize you're falling into these traps. This is why developing metacognitive awareness, that ability to observe your own learning process, is so valuable. You can catch yourself cramming similar subjects back to back and adjust. You can notice when you're stuck and choose to incubate rather than persist unproductively. You can recognize when an expert explanation isn't working and seek alternative resources. You can ensure your practice focuses on correct patterns rather than dwelling on errors. Avoiding mistakes isn't just about efficiency. It's also about maintaining motivation and confidence. When learning feels unnecessarily difficult because you're unknowingly working against yourself, frustration builds. You might conclude you're not capable, that the subject is too hard, that learning isn't for you. But often the problem isn't you or the subject, it's the approach. Recognizing and correcting these common mistakes can transform frustration into progress, can turn learning that felt impossible into learning that flows. And there's something liberating about understanding these pitfalls. You realize that struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Sometimes struggling is because you're cramming, because you need incubation time, because the expert teaching you has lost touch with the beginner's experience. These are fixable problems. They're about method, not about your fundamental capability. This shifts your relationship with difficulty. Instead of taking it personally, you become curious. What's making this hard? Is it the material itself? Or is it something about my approach? Am I in a mental rut that a break would help? Am I trying to learn in a way that doesn't match the content? This investigative stance, this willingness to question your methods rather than your capacity, is characteristic of effective learners. They don't assume the first approach will work perfectly. They experiment, they adjust, they avoid known pitfalls, they stay flexible. Learning becomes less about suffering through difficulty and more about intelligent problem solving. Figuring out what approach will work best for this particular material at this particular time, given your current state and circumstances. None of this means learning will always be easy or pleasant. Some difficulty is inherent, desirable even, as we discussed earlier. But the difficulty should come from engaging with genuinely challenging material from stretching your capabilities, from the productive struggle of constructing understanding. It shouldn't come from preventable mistakes in method, from fighting against how your brain actually works, from misconceptions about learning itself. By understanding and avoiding these common errors, you clear away the unnecessary obstacles, leaving only the good kind of challenge, the kind that makes you stronger. Let this understanding of what to avoid rest alongside everything you've learned about what to do. They're two sides of the same coin, both essential for effective learning. You're building not just knowledge about learning, but wisdom, the ability to distinguish productive approaches from counterproductive ones, to recognize when something isn't working and adjust, to learn not just harder but smarter. This wisdom accumulates through experience, through trying things and noticing what happens, through both successes and mistakes. Every learning experience teaches you not just the subject matter, but also something about how you learn best. Rest now in this growing wisdom. You don't need to be perfect, to avoid every mistake, to optimize every moment. Learning is a human process, messy and non-linear, full of false starts and unexpected breakthroughs. What matters is the general direction, the overall trajectory. Are you moving toward understanding, toward capability, toward mastery? If so, you're doing fine. The mistakes will happen, but now you'll recognize them more quickly, correct them more easily, and return to productive learning. Breathe, rest. More insights are waiting, but they're patient. Everything unfolds in its own time. Learning doesn't happen in isolation. We are fundamentally social creatures, and our learning is deeply shaped by our connections with others. These social dimensions of learning offer some of the most powerful accelerators available, yet they're often overlooked in our focus on individual study. Let these ideas about learning together drift through your mind. One of the most reliable ways to deepen your own understanding is to teach someone else. The protégé effect describes how preparing to teach and actually teaching produces better learning than studying for your own purposes alone. When you know you'll need to explain something to another person, you study differently. You think about what questions they might ask. You look for clear examples. You test your own understanding more rigorously because you know gaps will be exposed when you try to explain. The act of teaching itself forces you to organize information coherently, to find language that makes concepts clear, to respond to questions you hadn't considered. All of this processing strengthens your own mastery. But there's something even more powerful happening. When you take responsibility for someone else's learning, you're more motivated, more persistent, more thorough than when you're studying only for yourself. The social obligation, the desire to help, the mild pressure of someone depending on you, these overcome procrastination and surface-level engagement. You don't want to let your student down, so you push yourself to truly understand. Interestingly, the protégé effect works even when you're teaching someone who doesn't actually exist. Students who were told they were learning material to teach it to younger students learned more than students studying for a test, even though no teaching actually occurred. The mere expectation of teaching changed their approach. You can leverage this by always studying as if you'll need to teach the material. Create imaginary students, write explanations, record yourself explaining concepts. The teaching mindset transforms passive absorption into active mastery. The presence of others also affects your learning in immediate, visceral ways. Social facilitation is the phenomenon where the mere presence of other people changes your performance. For simple or well-practiced tasks, having others around typically improves performance. The presence of observers creates arousal, alertness, focus. But for complex or novel tasks, the same presence can impair performance because the arousal interferes with the careful thinking required. This is why practicing a speech alone is different from delivering it to an audience. Why solving a familiar problem feels easier when others are watching, but learning something new feels harder. Understanding this helps you structure your learning environment intelligently. When you're doing something you've already practiced, where the challenge is execution rather than learning, study in social spaces, coffee shops, libraries, study groups. The presence of others can enhance your focus and productivity. But when you're genuinely learning something new, when you're struggling with difficult concepts, you might need solitude. The social pressure, even just the awareness of others, can make it harder to think deeply and make mistakes freely. As you progress with a skill, you can gradually introduce social presence, using it to enhance performance. But respect the need for private struggle during initial learning phases. Your peers, those learning alongside you, are not just companions but powerful learning resources. Peer instruction is a teaching method where students learn from each other, but the principle extends beyond formal classrooms. When you're learning something, finding others at a similar level creates opportunities for mutual teaching. You explain concepts to each other. You work through problems together. You catch each other's mistakes and misconceptions. This works because peers share a similar perspective. Unlike experts who may have blind spots about what's difficult, peers remember their recent struggles. They can explain in ways that resonate because they just figured it out themselves. They use language and examples that make sense to someone at that level. Additionally, explaining to a peer feels safer than explaining to an expert. You're more willing to be tentative, to explore ideas partially formed, to make mistakes and learn from them. The peer relationship is collaborative rather than evaluative, which reduces anxiety and increases engagement. Study groups, learning partners, online communities, these aren't just social activities, they're learning multipliers. Each person brings different insights, different confusions, different ways of understanding. By engaging with these diverse perspectives, everyone's understanding deepens. The key is ensuring the interaction is genuinely collaborative, where everyone is participating and contributing, rather than one person doing all the explaining or all the work. Sometimes the barrier to learning isn't knowledge or ability, it's psychology. The Batman effect, named after the superhero, demonstrates how adopting an alter ego can improve performance, particularly in challenging situations. When children were asked to persist at a difficult task, those who pretended to be someone capable and determined, Batman, Dora the Explorer, someone they admired, persisted longer and performed better than those who didn't adopt a character. This works because the alter ego creates psychological distance from anxiety and self-doubt. Instead of "I can't do this," you think Batman wouldn't give up. The alter ego embodies qualities you want to access: confidence, persistence, creativity, making them easier to adopt. For learners, this can be surprisingly powerful. When facing intimidating material, when feeling inadequate or anxious, stepping into an alter ego can change your entire approach. You might imagine yourself as a confident scientist, a determined athlete, a wise teacher. This isn't about delusion or pretending you have knowledge you don't. It's about accessing psychological states that support learning. The alter ego gives you permission to be bold, to make mistakes, to persist when things are hard. It's a form of self-talk, a way of relating to yourself that enhances rather than undermines confidence. Some people find this practice silly, and that's fine. It's not for everyone. But for those who struggle with anxiety, imposter syndrome, or motivation, the alter ego technique can provide just enough psychological support to keep moving forward. These social dimensions of learning, teaching others, managing social presence, learning with peers, and adopting empowering identities, they all recognize that learning is not just a cognitive process. It's embedded in social contexts, shaped by relationships, influenced by how we see ourselves in relation to others. Humans evolved to learn socially. Children learn primarily through observation, imitation, and participation in social activities. Adults can leverage these same social mechanisms, though we often try to learn in isolation, treating it as a purely individual endeavor. There's also something motivating about learning socially. When you're accountable to others, when you're part of a learning community, when you can share struggles and victories, learning becomes more sustainable. The solitary learner has to generate all their own motivation, has to solve every problem alone, has to celebrate every achievement in isolation. The social learner has support, encouragement, diverse perspectives, shared joy in progress. The learning journey becomes less lonely, more human. But social learning requires some vulnerability. You have to be willing to expose what you don't know, to make mistakes in front of others, to ask questions that might seem stupid. This vulnerability is hard, especially in competitive environments or when you're trying to appear competent. Creating or finding learning environments where this vulnerability is safe is crucial. Study groups where the norm is mutual support rather than competition. Learning partners who commit to honesty and encouragement. Online communities with constructive rather than harsh feedback. The quality of the social environment matters enormously. Toxic social contexts, competitive, judgmental, discouraging, can make learning worse, not better. But supportive social contexts amplify learning in ways individual studies simply cannot match. And as you become more advanced, your role in learning communities evolves. You begin teaching more than learning, though if you're doing it right, you're still learning through teaching. You become the more knowledgeable peer, the one who explains and guides. This isn't just service to others, it's continued deepening of your own expertise. The cycle of learning and teaching, being taught and teaching, is how knowledge moves through communities, through generations. You were once the confused beginner asking basic questions. With time and effort, you become the patient guide helping the next confused beginner. This progression is natural, inevitable if you persist. Embracing both roles, humble learner and generous teacher, at different times and in different contexts, makes you both a better learner and a better contributor to others' learning. Social learning also keeps you honest. When you study alone, it's easy to fool yourself, to think you understand something you don't, to avoid difficult material, to take shortcuts. When you're learning with others, when you have to explain or demonstrate your understanding, these gaps become visible. Your study partner asks a question you can't answer. The person you're teaching looks confused by your explanation. These moments are uncomfortable but invaluable. They show you exactly where your understanding is weak, where you need to go back and learn more deeply. Solo study can let you drift along with superficial understanding. Social learning insists on actual comprehension. Let these social aspects of learning weave into your understanding now. You don't have to implement everything immediately. Don't have to join a study group or find a teaching opportunity right now. But know that these dimensions exist, that learning in isolation is just one option, and often not the most effective one. When you feel stuck, when motivation wanes, when concepts remain stubbornly confusing despite your efforts, consider the social dimension. Could teaching someone help you understand better? Would studying alongside others improve your focus? Might explaining your confusion to a peer clarify your thinking? Is there an identity or alter ego that would help you approach the challenge more confidently? Learning is ultimately about becoming more capable, more knowledgeable, more skilled. But it's also about connecting with ideas, with yourself, and with others. The social dimension of learning honors the fact that we grow not just as isolated minds accumulating information, but as social beings sharing understanding, building knowledge together, supporting each other through the challenges of growth. This connectedness doesn't weaken learning, it strengthens it, making it more joyful, more sustainable, more human. Rest now in this expanded view of what learning can be. You're not alone in this journey, even when you're studying by yourself. You're part of a long tradition of humans learning, teaching, growing together. That tradition supports you, even in solitude. And when you're ready, you can reach out, connect, learn with and from others, adding the power of social learning to everything else you know. Breathe easily. More wisdom is coming, but it arrives in its own time. For now, simply rest. We've explored techniques, methods, and systems, but none of them work without the psychological foundation to support them. Your mindset, your motivation, how you relate to the learning process itself. These determine whether you'll actually use what you know. Let these insights about the mental game of learning settle gently into your awareness. Motivation is often thought of as something you either have or don't have, something that comes and goes mysteriously. But motivation follows patterns, and you can work with those patterns. Variable ratio reinforcement is one of the most powerful motivational mechanisms discovered in psychology. It refers to rewards that come unpredictably, not after every action or even after a fixed number of actions, but randomly. This creates the strongest, most persistent behavior of any reinforcement schedule. It's why gambling is so addictive. You don't know when the next win will come, so you keep playing. You can use this ethically in your own learning by creating unpredictable rewards. Don't reward yourself the same way every time you complete a study session. Sometimes give yourself a small reward, sometimes a bigger one, sometimes none at all. The unpredictability keeps your motivation system engaged. Your brain doesn't know when the reward is coming, so it maintains high engagement throughout. This might seem manipulative, but you're simply working with your brain's natural reward circuitry rather than against it. The key is that the variable reward should be genuinely rewarding to you, and that the learning itself should be the primary focus, with rewards as supplementary motivation. You might use surprise breaks, varied treats, occasional special activities, anything that feels rewarding but doesn't follow a predictable pattern. This prevents your motivation from becoming dependent on constant rewards while maintaining engagement over long periods. Motivation also improves dramatically when you're specific about implementation. If-then plans, also called implementation intentions, are concrete commitments that specify exactly when and where you'll perform a behavior. Instead of, "I'll study more," you create an if-then rule. If it's 7 p.m. on a weekday, then I'll study for 1 hour at my desk. The specificity removes decision-making in the moment. You're not constantly negotiating with yourself about whether to study. The trigger occurs. The behavior follows automatically. This works because willpower and motivation fluctuate, but habits and pre-commitments are more stable. When the specified condition occurs, you've already decided what to do. The decision-making burden is removed. Research shows that if-then plans dramatically increase follow-through compared to vague intentions. You can create multiple if-then plans covering different situations. If I feel stuck on a problem, Then I'll take a 5-minute walk before trying a different approach. If I finish a study session, then I'll write down one thing I learned before closing my books. These plans turn general intentions into specific, automatic behaviors. The more of your learning process you can encode into if-then plans, the less you depend on moment-to-moment motivation. The structure carries you forward even when motivation is low. Perhaps most importantly, how you interpret difficulty and failure shapes whether you persist or give up. Growth mindset is the belief that abilities can be developed through effort, as opposed to fixed mindset. The belief that abilities are innate and unchangeable. People with growth mindset see challenges as opportunities to grow, mistakes as information about what to work on, effort as the path to mastery. People with fixed mindset see challenges as threats that might expose their inadequacy, mistakes as evidence of limited ability, effort as a sign that they lack natural talent. These mindsets profoundly affect learning. Fixed mindset leads to avoiding challenges, giving up easily, feeling threatened by others' success. Growth mindset leads to embracing challenges, persisting despite setbacks, finding inspiration in others' success. The remarkable thing is that mindsets can be changed. Simply learning about neuroplasticity, about how the brain grows through challenge and effort, can shift someone toward growth mindset. Actively reframing your internal dialogue helps too. When you catch yourself thinking, "I'm bad at this," you can reframe to, "I haven't mastered this yet." When you think, "This is too hard," you can reframe to, "This is challenging," which means I'm learning. Related to this is error positivity, the practice of viewing mistakes as valuable rather than shameful. Every error is information. It shows you where your understanding is incomplete, where your skills need development. Welcoming errors, even celebrating them as learning opportunities, removes the emotional charge that often accompanies mistakes. Instead of feeling frustrated or ashamed, you feel curious. What can this mistake teach me? This shift from seeing errors as failures to seeing them as data transforms the entire learning experience. As you develop skills, you don't have to build each one in isolation. Skill stacking is the practice of combining complementary skills to create unique and valuable capability. Each individual skill might be moderately developed, but the combination is rare and powerful. Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, describes himself as not the best artist, not the funniest person, not the best business mind, but the combination of decent drawing, decent humor, and decent business sense created something unique. For learners, this means thinking strategically about how skills combine. You might learn a foreign language plus programming, creating unique value in international software development. You might combine writing plus scientific knowledge plus teaching skill to become an exceptional science communicator. The stacking means you don't need to achieve world-class mastery in any single skill. Good enough competence in several complementary skills can create opportunities that mastery of one skill alone wouldn't provide. This is motivating because it's achievable. Getting into the top 1% of a single skill is extremely difficult. Getting into the top 25% of 3 skills that work together is much more realistic, and the combination puts you in a unique niche. As you learn, think about what skills would complement each other in your goals. How do your existing skills combine with what you're learning now? What additional skill would make the combination even more valuable? These mindset and motivation principles, leveraging variable rewards, creating if-then plans, adopting growth mindset and error positivity, and stacking complementary skills, they address the sustainability of learning. Techniques are useful, but only if you actually apply them consistently over time. And consistent application depends on maintaining motivation, managing your psychology, and seeing meaningful progress toward goals that matter to you. One of the deepest truths about learning is that how you feel about the process matters as much as what techniques you use. If learning feels like punishment, like a constant battle with yourself, you won't sustain it. But if learning feels engaging, if you can find satisfaction in the process itself, even when progress is slow, sustainability becomes easier. This doesn't mean learning should always feel good. Sometimes it's genuinely difficult and frustrating. But the overall relationship with learning, the general feeling about it, should be positive or at least neutral. When it becomes consistently negative, something needs to change. Maybe the approach, maybe the material, maybe the goals themselves. Building intrinsic motivation, where the learning itself is rewarding rather than just a means to an external goal, creates the most sustainable learning. You're not just pushing through because you have to. You're engaging because some part of you genuinely wants to. This intrinsic motivation comes from several sources: autonomy, feeling you have choice and control over your learning; competence, experiencing yourself getting better, making progress; purpose, connecting the learning to something meaningful to you. When these three elements are present, motivation becomes more stable, less dependent on external pressure or rewards. You study because you're genuinely interested, because you're seeing yourself improve, because it matters to you. This doesn't mean external motivations like grades or career advancement are bad. They can provide initial momentum, but over time, cultivating intrinsic motivation makes learning far more sustainable and enjoyable. Your beliefs about yourself as a learner also matter tremendously. If you believe you're not a good learner, that belief becomes self-fulfilling. You interpret struggles as confirmation of your inadequacy rather than as normal parts of learning. You give up more easily because you expected to fail anyway. But if you believe you're capable of learning, that with the right approach and enough effort you can master new things, that belief supports persistence. It helps you interpret setbacks as temporary rather than permanent, as situational rather than about fundamental inadequacy. This isn't about delusional positive thinking. It's about accurate assessment. The reality is that neuroplasticity means almost everyone can learn almost anything given sufficient time, effective methods, and appropriate support. There are variations in speed, in natural aptitude, in resources available. But the fundamental capacity to learn is nearly universal. Believing this about yourself isn't arrogance. It's recognizing your human birthright. Your brain was designed to learn. You've been doing it since birth. The question isn't whether you can learn, but whether you'll use effective methods and maintain motivation long enough for learning to occur. Part of mindset is also how you define success. If success means immediate mastery, perfect performance, never struggling, you'll be perpetually disappointed. Learning involves lots of imperfect attempts, confusion, forgetting, relearning. That's not failure, that's the process. Redefining success as engagement with the process, as showing up consistently, as being willing to struggle and try again, makes success achievable every day. You're not waiting for some distant outcome to feel successful. You succeed every time you practice, every time you push through confusion, every time you try again after failing. This shift makes learning more rewarding because success is abundant rather than rare. Mindset work isn't something you do once and check off. It's ongoing, a continuous practice of noticing your thoughts about learning and adjusting them when they're counterproductive. You catch yourself catastrophizing about a setback and remind yourself it's temporary. You notice yourself avoiding challenge and push gently toward it instead. You recognize fixed mindset thoughts and reframe them. This internal dialogue, this relationship with yourself as learner, is always there beneath the surface, making it more constructive, more supportive, more growth-oriented. Doesn't require huge effort, just awareness and willingness to adjust. And here's something beautiful. As your mindset shifts toward growth, toward error positivity, toward intrinsic motivation, learning starts changing how you see the world. Challenges become interesting rather than threatening. You become curious about your own development. You notice growth in yourself that would have been invisible before. Learning stops being something you do to achieve external goals and becomes part of how you engage with life. This transformation is subtle, gradual, but profound. You become someone who learns, not because you have to, but because that's who you are. Let these ideas about mindset and motivation rest in you now. You don't need to immediately overhaul how you think. Small shifts compound over time. Notice your self-talk. Create one if-then plan. Reframe one mistake as information. Stack one new skill with something you already know. These small practices, repeated, reshape your relationship with learning from the inside out. And that internal relationship, more than any technique or method, determines what you'll ultimately achieve. Breathe slowly. Rest. You've traveled through an enormous landscape of learning science, and yet there's still more to explore. But there's no hurry. Learning is patient. Understanding deepens over time. For now, simply rest in what you've absorbed, letting it settle, letting it become part of you. More awaits, but it will be there when you're ready. As we move deeper into the landscape of learning, we encounter tools and insights that seem surprising, almost like hidden shortcuts that few people know about. These are the advanced cognitive tools, techniques that work through unexpected pathways. Let these possibilities drift through your awareness like gentle discoveries. Your brain operates on rhythms, electrical oscillations at different frequencies. Binaural beats are an auditory phenomenon where slightly different frequencies are played in each ear, and your brain perceives a third frequency, the difference between the two. If one ear receives a 200 Hz tone and the other receives 210 Hz, your brain perceives a 10 Hz beat. Different frequencies are associated with different mental states. Alpha waves, around 8 to 12 Hz, are linked to relaxed alertness. Theta waves, around 4-8 Hz, are associated with deep meditation and creativity. Beta waves, around 13-30 Hz, correlate with focused attention. The theory is that listening to binaural beats can guide your brain into specific states beneficial for learning. Some people report improved focus, reduced anxiety, enhanced creativity when using binaural beats. The scientific evidence is mixed. Some studies show benefits, others don't. This appears to be a technique that works for some people, but not others. If you're curious, it's easy to experiment. Many apps and websites provide binaural beat tracks designed for focus, relaxation, or creativity. Listen while studying and notice whether your subjective experience improves. If it helps, use it. If not, you've lost nothing but a bit of time. The key is headphones. You need different frequencies in each ear for the effect to work. Even if the mechanism isn't fully proven, if the placebo effect of expecting improved focus actually improves your focus, that's still valuable. Whatever works. The speed at which you consume information can be adjusted deliberately. Speed listening means playing audio content, lectures, audiobooks, podcasts, at faster than normal speed. Most people can comprehend speech at 1.5 to 2 times normal speed with practice. This saves time, obviously, but there's an additional benefit. Faster playback requires more attention. You can't drift off because you'll lose the thread. This enforced attention can actually improve retention compared to slower speeds that allow mind wandering. Your brain has to work slightly harder to keep up, and that engagement helps in coding. Start by increasing speed gradually. Jump immediately to 2x, and you'll feel overwhelmed. But if you start at 1.25x, adjust to that, then move to 1.5x, you'll be surprised how quickly it becomes comfortable. Your brain adapts, and soon anything at normal speed feels sluggish. There are limits. At some point, speed becomes counterproductive, where you're processing words but not meaning. And for particularly dense or important material, slower speeds that allow deeper processing are better. But for review material, for content where you're catching main ideas rather than memorizing details, speed listening is an efficient tool. You're essentially time compressing your learning input, fitting more information into available time without sacrificing much comprehension. Gaming often gets dismissed as wasted time, but certain types of games actually enhance learning capacity. Action video games, particularly fast-paced games requiring quick decisions and attention to multiple elements, improve what researchers call learning to learn. People who play action games regularly show enhanced visual attention, faster processing speed, better ability to track multiple objects, improved spatial cognition. But more interestingly, they get better at learning new perceptual and cognitive tasks faster than non-gamers. The games train general cognitive flexibility and rapid adaptation. Your brain gets practice dealing with changing rules, shifting attention quickly, making decisions with incomplete information. These are transferable skills. You're not just getting better at the game, you're training cognitive systems that apply broadly. This doesn't mean all gaming is beneficial, and excessive gaming has obvious downsides. But moderate engagement with action video games, maybe 30 to 60 minutes a few times per week, appears to have genuine cognitive benefits. It's a form of perceptual and cognitive training that happens to be engaging and fun. For learners, especially those learning complex, dynamic skills, incorporating some action gaming might actually support broader learning goals. It's brain training disguised as entertainment. Sometimes making information harder to process actually improves learning. The disfluency effect shows that when material is slightly difficult to read or process, may be displayed in a less readable font, may be requiring more effort to decode, retention improves. This seems backwards. Wouldn't easier processing be better? But the extra effort required to process disfluent information triggers deeper engagement. You slow down, you pay more attention, you process more carefully. The struggle to decode creates additional cognitive engagement that strengthens memory. This doesn't mean you should make everything difficult to read. Extreme disfluency that makes comprehension nearly impossible is counterproductive. But moderate disfluency, enough to require slightly more effort without causing frustration, can enhance learning. You might occasionally take notes by hand instead of typing, which is more effortful but produces better retention. You might choose more challenging materials that require more mental work to understand. You might deliberately avoid overly simplified explanations, engaging with complexity, even when simpler versions exist. The ease and fluency that feels good during learning often produces worse retention than difficulty that feels harder. This is another instance where what feels effective and what actually is effective diverge. The smooth, easy learning experience that feels productive might be leaving shallow traces. The harder, more effortful experience that feels less productive might be building deeper, more durable understanding. We've touched on this before, but it bears repeating with emphasis as we near the end of our journey. First principles thinking is perhaps the most powerful cognitive tool for deep learning. Breaking things down to fundamental truths and reasoning up from there creates understanding that transcends memorization. When you know the foundational principles, you can derive everything else. You're not dependent on remembering specific facts or procedures. You can reconstruct them from basics. This makes your knowledge portable, flexible, resilient. If you forget a detail, you can reason your way back to it. If you encounter a new situation, you can apply principles rather than searching for memorized procedures that might not fit. First principles thinking also reveals when you don't actually understand something. If you can't break it down to fundamentals, if you can't explain why it's true from basic principles, you're probably working with borrowed understanding rather than genuine comprehension. This method of thinking is more effortful than surface learning. It takes longer initially, but it produces understanding that lasts, that transfers, that allows genuine mastery. As you encounter any new subject or skill, make it a practice to ask, what are the absolute basics here? What must be true? What are the core principles from which everything else flows? When you ground yourself in these fundamentals, the complexity above them becomes navigable rather than overwhelming. You're not lost in a forest of facts. You're standing on solid bedrock with a clear view of how everything connects. And finally, something we mentioned earlier deserves return now as we close this particular loop. Nature walks restore attention and cognitive capacity in ways that almost nothing else can. After intensive learning, after pushing your brain hard, stepping into nature provides unique restoration. The soft fascination of natural environments, the gentle movement of leaves, the play of light on water, the presence of living things. This engages your attention without depleting it. Your directed attention, exhausted from learning, rests and recovers, while your involuntary attention gently engages with nature. You're not trying to think. You're not working. You're simply present in a healing environment. The effect is both immediate and cumulative. Even a brief walk improves your capacity for focus when you return. Regular nature exposure builds cognitive resilience over time. This isn't mystical. It's about giving your attentional systems the specific type of rest they need to function optimally. In our built environments, full of human-made stimuli demanding attention, there's no escape from cognitive load. Nature provides that escape. It's a refuge where your mind can truly rest while your body gently moves. For anyone engaged in intensive learning, regular nature walks aren't just nice. They're essential maintenance for your cognitive system. They close the loop of intense effort and necessary recovery, preventing burnout and sustaining learning over the long term. These advanced tools, binaural beats, speed listening, action gaming, strategic disfluency, first principles reasoning, and nature restoration, they're not fundamental to learning in the way that retrieval practice or spaced repetition are. You could learn effectively without ever using them, but they're available, tested by research and practitioners, ready to deploy when you need an edge or when conventional approaches aren't quite enough. Part of mastering learning is building a diverse toolkit, knowing not just one way to approach every challenge, but multiple options you can deploy, depending on circumstances. Some of these tools might resonate with you immediately. Others might seem irrelevant or uninteresting. That's fine. Learning is personal. What accelerates one person's learning might do nothing for another. The invitation is to remain curious, to experiment, to notice what actually works for you rather than what's supposed to work. Try binaural beats and see if your focus improves. Speed up your audio content and notice whether comprehension suffers or attention improves. Play an action game and see if you notice enhanced mental flexibility. Choose harder materials and observe whether the struggle produces deeper learning. Return to first principles when complexity overwhelms you. Walk in nature when your mind feels exhausted. Each experiment teaches you something about how your particular mind works, what supports your learning, what hinders it. And as you build this personalized understanding, you become increasingly effective, not just at learning any specific thing, but at learning itself. You develop what might be called learning wisdom, the ability to look at any learning challenge and intuitively know what approach will work, what tools to deploy, how to structure your practice. This wisdom isn't something you can download or memorize. It develops through experience, through trying things and noticing results, through both successes and failures. Every learning experience contributes to this growing wisdom about how you learn best. This wisdom is perhaps the most valuable thing you can develop as a learner. Specific knowledge becomes outdated. Specific skills become irrelevant as technology and culture change. But the ability to learn quickly and effectively, that remains valuable throughout life. It's the ultimate meta skill, the ability that makes all other abilities acquirable. You're not trapped by what you currently know or can do. You're empowered by the knowledge that you can learn whatever becomes necessary or interesting. That's freedom. That's power. Not the power of knowing everything, but the power of knowing you can learn anything. Let these advanced tools settle into your awareness now. They're available when you need them, part of your growing repertoire. Some you'll use regularly, some you'll use rarely or never. What matters is knowing they exist, having options, being able to adapt your approach to whatever learning challenge you face. You're not limited to one way of learning. You have dozens of tools, hundreds of small insights, an entire system of understanding how learning works. That system serves you now and will continue serving you through whatever learning journeys lie ahead. Breathe slowly, rest deeply. We're approaching the end of this particular journey through learning science, but the understanding you've built will continue growing, deepening, evolving as you put it into practice. For now, simply rest. Let everything integrate. The final insights are waiting, patient and ready, whenever you're prepared to receive them. We've explored the internal landscape of learning, the techniques, the mindsets, the cognitive tools. Now we turn to something equally important, but often overlooked, the physical environment and lifestyle that supports learning. These are the foundational conditions, the substrate upon which all learning happens. Let these practical considerations settle into your understanding. We touched on this at the very beginning, but it bears repeating with emphasis. Hydration is so fundamental to cognitive function that even mild dehydration impairs your ability to learn. Your brain is approximately 73% water, and it's exquisitely sensitive to changes in hydration status. When you're dehydrated by just 1 or 2% of your body weight, which might mean you're slightly thirsty but not desperately so, your attention spans shorten, your working memory becomes less efficient, your mood deteriorates, and your perception of difficulty increases. Tasks that would be manageable when properly hydrated feel harder when you're dehydrated. The solution is remarkably simple. Drink water consistently throughout the day. Keep water nearby when studying. Drink before you feel thirsty, because thirst is already a sign of dehydration. The exact amount varies by person, activity level, and climate, but a general guideline is enough water that your urine is pale yellow rather than dark. This isn't glamorous advice. It won't revolutionize your learning overnight, but it's foundational. Every other technique and tool works better when your brain has the water it needs to function optimally. Dehydration is a completely preventable cognitive impairment, yet many people study and work in a chronically dehydrated state without realizing it's affecting their performance. Something as simple as a water bottle within reach can be the difference between a productive learning session and an unnecessarily difficult one. Your body's balance system connects to learning in ways you might not expect. Vestibular stimulation, activating your sense of balance and spatial orientation, can serve as a cognitive reset when your mind feels stuck or foggy. We mentioned this earlier in terms of priming the brain, but it's equally valuable as a tool for restoration during learning. When you've been sitting and thinking for extended periods, your body becomes stagnant and your mind often follows. Standing up and doing something that engages your vestibular system, balancing on one foot, doing gentle movements that shift your center of gravity, even just walking with attention to your balance, can clear mental fog and restore alertness. The vestibular system connects broadly throughout your brain, and activating it seems to wake up cognitive systems that have been drifting. This is particularly useful during those afternoon slumps when focus becomes elusive. Instead of more caffeine or pushing through ineffectively, a few minutes of balance-focused movement can restore your capacity to concentrate. Rock slowly side to side. Stand on one foot while reviewing notes. Walk with deliberate attention to your balance and body position. These simple practices engage sensory motor systems that refresh cognitive function. It's like rebooting your attention system through your body. The lighting in your learning environment profoundly affects your cognitive state, yet it's often left to whatever happens to be available. Light temperature, whether light is cool and blue-toned or warm and amber-toned, signals your brain about what time of day it is and what state you should be in. Bright, cool light similar to daylight tells your brain it's time to be alert, focused, productive. It suppresses melatonin and enhances attention. This is ideal for learning that requires sharp focus and quick thinking. Warm, dimmer light signals evening, relaxation, winding down. It's better for reflective thinking, integration, creativity that doesn't require intense focus. Most people leave their lighting fixed, using the same setting all day. But you can optimize by matching light to task. When doing focused, demanding cognitive work, use bright, cool light, either natural daylight if possible, or artificial lights that mimic daylight spectrum. When doing review, reflection, or creative exploration that benefits from a relaxed state, use warmer, softer lighting. If you study in the evening, consider using bright light during study, but shifting to warm light afterward to allow your circadian rhythm to prepare for sleep. Poor lighting choices can work against you. Trying to focus under dim, warm light leaves you drowsy, while bright blue light late in the evening disrupts sleep quality. Matching your light environment to your task and time of day is a simple intervention with meaningful effects on both immediate performance and long-term health. The position of your body while learning also matters more than you might think. Standing desks, or the practice of alternating between sitting and standing during work and study, offers several benefits for learning. First, standing increases alertness. It's harder to zone out or become drowsy when you're on your feet. Your body has to maintain balance and position, which keeps your nervous system slightly more activated. This can be particularly valuable during periods when you're fighting fatigue. Second, the ability to move while standing, shifting weight, walking in place, gentle movement, prevents the stagnation that comes from prolonged sitting. Blood flow remains more active, which supports brain function. Third, Regularly changing position prevents the physical discomfort that comes from extended sitting, which can be a major distraction from learning. When your back hurts or your legs are stiff, part of your attention is consumed by discomfort. Standing periodically relieves this. The key is alternation. Standing all day is as problematic as sitting all day. But switching between sitting and standing every 30 to 60 minutes gives you the benefits of both while avoiding the downsides of either. If you don't have a standing desk, you can create makeshift standing positions, putting your laptop on a high counter, stacking books to raise your work surface. The goal isn't perfect ergonomics. It's simply varying your position to keep your body and mind engaged. And finally, we return once more to something so simple, yet so powerful, it deserves emphasis here at the end. Nature, spending time in natural environments, is perhaps the most comprehensive lifestyle intervention for supporting learning. We've talked about nature walks as attention restoration, as recovery from cognitive fatigue. But nature offers something more holistic. Regular time in nature reduces stress, improves mood, enhances creativity, strengthens immune function, improves sleep quality. All of these support learning indirectly but powerfully. When you're chronically stressed, learning suffers. When your sleep is poor, memory consolidation is impaired. When your mood is low, motivation evaporates. Nature addresses all of these simultaneously. It's not just about taking a walk when you need a break, though that's valuable. It's about making nature a regular part of your life, a practice you return to consistently, not just when you're desperate for relief. This might mean walking in a park several times a week. It might mean studying outside when weather permits. It might mean keeping plants in your learning space. It might mean taking your breaks in gardens or green spaces rather than in more built environments. The dose matters. Research suggests at least 2 hours per week in nature provides measurable benefits, though more is better. And it doesn't have to be wilderness. City parks, tree-lined streets, any green space offers benefits compared to purely urban environments. These lifestyle and environmental factors, hydration, vestibular engagement, lighting optimization, postural variation, and nature exposure, they're not learning techniques in the traditional sense. They're the conditions that make learning possible. They're like soil quality for a plant. The plant's growth strategies matter, but they're only effective if the soil provides adequate nutrients, water, and support. Similarly, all the learning techniques we've explored work better when your physical and environmental conditions support rather than hinder cognitive function. Many people ignore these factors, attributing learning difficulties to lack of ability or poor techniques, when the real problem is trying to learn while dehydrated, under poor lighting, after sitting motionless for hours, never seeing nature. These basic conditions have enormous influence. Getting them right won't make you a genius, but getting them wrong will reliably impair your performance. And the beautiful thing is how accessible these interventions are. You don't need special equipment or training. You need water, awareness of lighting, occasional movement, and access to some green space. These are available to almost everyone. There's also something grounding about attending to these physical factors. In our culture, learning is often treated as a purely mental activity, as if your brain floats disconnected from your body and environment. But you're an embodied organism. Your cognitive function emerges from the interaction of your brain with your body and environment, attending to hydration, to movement, to light, to nature. These practices acknowledge and honor that embodiment. You're caring for the whole system, not just trying to optimize one component. This holistic approach to learning, attending to technique and mindset, and environment and lifestyle creates sustainable excellence. You're not burning yourself out with intense cognitive effort while neglecting physical needs. You're not optimizing your environment while maintaining counterproductive mindsets. You're addressing all dimensions simultaneously, creating conditions where learning flows more naturally, feels less like struggle, becomes integrated into a healthy life, rather than something that depletes you. And as you implement these environmental and lifestyle supports, you'll likely notice something interesting. The learning becomes easier, not because the material changed, but because you changed the conditions. What felt impossibly difficult when you were dehydrated, under poor lighting, sitting for hours, disconnected from nature becomes merely challenging, difficult but manageable. When those conditions improve, you realize how much of your struggle was environmental rather than intrinsic to the learning itself. This is empowering. It means you have more control than you thought. You're not helpless in the face of learning challenges. You can adjust conditions, can make choices that support your cognitive function, can create environments where learning is more likely to succeed. Let these practical considerations integrate with everything else you've learned. The techniques give you methods. The mindset gives you persistence. The environment gives you support. Together, they form a complete system, a way of approaching learning that addresses every dimension of the challenge. You're not just optimizing one variable, you're creating an entire ecology of learning, where every element supports every other element, where the whole becomes more than the sum of its parts. Rest now in this complete understanding. You've journeyed through the science of learning, from how neurons change to what kind of light best supports focus, from the depths of brain chemistry to the simple practice of drinking water, from advanced cognitive techniques to the healing power of trees. All of it matters, all of it contributes, and all of it is available to you, ready to support whatever learning you choose to pursue. Breathe deeply. Let your body rest. Feel the stillness. You've absorbed an enormous amount of understanding about learning. It will settle and integrate as you rest, as you sleep, as you move through your days. You don't need to remember every detail. The essence will remain, will guide you, will surface when you need it. For now, simply be. Simply rest. The journey through learning science is complete. What remains is simply to live it, to apply this understanding, to discover what becomes possible when you learn how to learn. And that discovery unfolds not all at once, but gradually, through practice and experimentation and patient attention to your own growing capabilities. Rest now. You've earned it. We've traveled through the practical, the proven, the systematic approaches to learning. Now, as we close this journey, let's venture into the extraordinary, the edges of what's possible when you push beyond conventional boundaries. These are the practices and phenomena that hint at human potential we're only beginning to understand. Let these final insights wash over you like a gentle revelation. Sleep is not just rest. It's an alternate state of consciousness where extraordinary things become possible. Lucid dreaming practice, the art of becoming aware within your dreams and gaining some control over them, represents one of the most fascinating frontiers in learning. When you achieve lucidity in a dream, you're conscious while your brain is in REM sleep, a state of intense neural activity. In this state, you can practice skills, rehearse scenarios, explore creative possibilities, all within the dream space. Athletes report practicing complex movements in lucid dreams and finding improvement in waking performance. Musicians rehearse difficult passages. Students work through problems. The experience feels real because, in many ways, it is real to your brain. The neural patterns of dreaming can closely resemble those of waking experience, which means practice in dreams may provide genuine learning benefits. Developing lucid dreaming ability takes time and dedication. Most people need weeks or months of practice before they can lucid dream reliably. The techniques involve reality testing during the day, keeping dream journals, using mnemonic techniques to remember to recognize your dreaming. It's not easy, and not everyone succeeds. But for those who develop this skill, it offers something almost magical: the ability to practice and explore during hours that would otherwise be unavailable for learning. You're essentially extending your conscious practice time into sleep, using the dream state as a simulation environment where physical limitations don't apply and consequences don't exist. It's learning beyond the boundaries of waking life. Even if you don't achieve full lucid dreaming, there's a threshold state you can access more easily. The hypnagogic state, that drowsy transition between waking and sleeping, offers unique cognitive opportunities. In this state, characterized by theta brain waves, your thinking becomes more fluid, more associative, less bound by rigid logic. Insights arise, creative connections form. Solutions to problems you've been working on suddenly appear. Many great thinkers throughout history have deliberately cultivated this state. Thomas Edison reportedly held ball bearings in his hand while sitting in a chair, allowing himself to drift toward sleep. As he fell asleep fully, his hand would relax, the ball bearings would drop and wake him, and he'd capture whatever insights had emerged in that threshold moment. Salvador Dalí used a similar technique with a key. The hypnagogic state seems to allow the unconscious mind's processing to become briefly accessible to consciousness. All the work your brain has been doing beneath awareness suddenly surfaces. You can use this deliberately by reviewing problems or concepts just before sleep, then keeping a notebook nearby to capture anything that emerges in that transition state, or upon waking, lingering in that drowsy state before fully engaging with the day, noticing what thoughts or insights are present. This state is brief and delicate. You can't force it, and trying too hard to analyze what's happening pulls you out of it. But with gentle attention, you can learn to harvest the creativity and insight that naturally arise in this boundary consciousness. And while you sleep, even when you're not lucid, your brain is doing extraordinary work. REM sleep prunes and optimizes your neural networks, strengthening important connections while weakening unnecessary ones. Your brain is literally sculpting itself while you dream, refining the learning that happened during waking hours. This is why sleep after learning is so crucial. It's not just rest, it's active consolidation and optimization. The brain reviews what you practiced, what you studied, what you experienced, and makes decisions about what to keep, what to discard, what to integrate with existing knowledge. Dreams themselves may be part of this process, the subjective experience of your brain sorting, connecting, and consolidating information. This means every night of sleep is an opportunity for learning to deepen, for skills to solidify, for understanding to clarify. The student who studies then sleeps is not just resting. They're allowing their brain to complete the learning process. The athlete who sleeps after practice is allowing neural optimization to occur. Sleep is not downtime from learning. It's when some of the most important learning happens. Respecting this, prioritizing sleep, protecting its quality. These aren't signs of laziness. They're recognition that learning is a partnership between your waking efforts and your sleeping brain's optimization. Beyond sleep, there are waking activities that enhance your general capacity to learn. We mentioned earlier that action video games improve learning to learn, and this deserves emphasis here at the close. People who regularly play fast-paced action games show enhanced visual attention, faster processing speed, better tracking of multiple objects, improved cognitive flexibility. But the deeper finding is that they get better at learning new perceptual and cognitive tasks faster than non-gamers. The games aren't just improving specific skills, they're training the brain's learning systems themselves. You're practicing rapid adaptation, quick decision-making under uncertainty, attention allocation across complex environments. These are meta-skills, capabilities that support learning across many domains. This suggests that certain types of cognitive training, even when they seem unrelated to your learning goals, can enhance your general learning capacity. The brain that's learned to adapt quickly in one context becomes better at adapting in other contexts. This is the opposite of narrow skill development. It's training general cognitive plasticity, making your brain more nimble, more capable of reshaping itself in response to new demands. Moderate engagement with action games, perhaps 30 to 60 minutes several times per week, appears to provide these benefits without the downsides of excessive gaming. It's one form of cognitive cross-training that supports learning broadly. And now, as we close this exploration of learning, we arrive at perhaps the most profound practice for accelerating brain plasticity: music training. Learning to play an instrument, learning to read music, engaging deeply with musical practice, produces changes in the brain that extend far beyond music itself. Musicians show enhanced auditory processing, improved fine motor control, better executive function, stronger working memory, enhanced emotional regulation. The corpus callosum, connecting the brain's hemispheres, is larger in musicians. The motor cortex shows expanded representation for finger movements. The auditory cortex becomes more sensitive and discriminating. These aren't just correlations. Studies of people learning music show these changes developing over time with practice. Music training appears to be one of the most comprehensive workouts for the brain available. It engages auditory, motor, visual, and emotional systems simultaneously. It requires precise timing, fine motor control, reading complex notation, listening, critically, expressing emotion, often coordinating with others. Few activities engage so much of the brain so intensively. But here's what makes music training particularly relevant to learning broadly. The plasticity induced by music practice appears to transfer. Musicians don't just get better at music, they show enhanced learning abilities in other domains. Children who receive music training show improvements in language skills, mathematical reasoning, and general IQ beyond what would be expected from other enrichment activities. Adults who take up music show maintenance of cognitive function, and even some reversal of age-related decline. The brain that learns music becomes, in some fundamental way, better at learning anything. This might be because music training exercises so many cognitive systems simultaneously that it strengthens the brain's general capacity for change. Or it might be that the discipline, attention, and persistence required for musical progress build habits and capabilities that transfer to any learning domain. Whatever the mechanism, the evidence is clear. Engaging seriously with music accelerates brain plasticity in ways that support learning far beyond music itself. This doesn't mean everyone needs to become a musician to learn effectively, but it suggests something profound about the nature of learning and the brain's potential. Your brain is not fixed. It's not limited to its current capabilities. Through practice, through engagement, through consistent challenge, it can reshape itself, can develop new capacities, can become better at learning itself. Music training is one particularly powerful path to this transformation, but it represents a broader truth. The brain you have today is not the brain you're stuck with. It's the brain you have so far. the result of everything you've done and experienced up to this point. But it remains plastic, remains capable of change, remains ready to develop new abilities if you provide the right experiences. This is the ultimate lesson of everything we've explored. From the basic mechanics of how neurons change through focused attention, to the complex interplay of sleep and practice and environment and mindset, to these extraordinary practices at the edges of normal experience, all of it points to the same truth. You are not limited by your current knowledge or abilities. You're not trapped by past failures or current confusion. You have within you a 3-pound universe of potential that can reshape itself, that can learn, that can grow, that can become capable of things that seem impossible to you now. The journey of learning is not about filling an empty vessel with information. It's about transformation, about becoming someone who can do and understand things you currently cannot. Every time you struggle with difficult material, every time you practice despite frustration, every time you sleep after studying, every time you push through confusion toward clarity, you're not just acquiring knowledge. You're reshaping your brain, rewiring your neural networks, becoming a different and more capable version of yourself. And this transformation is available to everyone. It doesn't require genius or special talent. It requires only willingness to engage, to struggle, to persist, to use the methods that work even when they feel difficult, to care for the brain and body that make learning possible. The science of learning that we've explored is really a science of transformation, a map of how humans can deliberately develop new capabilities, can exceed their current limitations, can become more than they currently are. As you move forward from this moment, you carry with you not just techniques and facts about learning, but a deeper understanding of your own potential. You know now that your brain is plastic, that it changes through use, that you have agency in shaping it. You know that sleep is not wasted time but essential to learning. You know that mistakes are not failures but necessary steps in growth. You know that difficulty is not a sign you're incapable, but evidence you're learning. You know that attention, practice, environment, mindset, all of these are tools you can wield deliberately to support your development. The learning you do from this point forward will be different because you understand it differently. You're not just hoping to learn, not just passively exposing yourself to information. You're actively engaging with proven principles, structuring your practice intelligently, creating conditions that support cognitive function, believing in your capacity to grow. This understanding doesn't make learning effortless. It will still be challenging, will still require work and persistence, but it makes learning purposeful, effective, sustainable. You're no longer working against yourself, no longer using methods that undermine your efforts. You're aligned with how learning actually works. And perhaps most beautifully, as you learn more effectively, as you see yourself developing capabilities you didn't have before, something shifts internally. You begin to identify not just as someone who knows things, but as someone who learns. Not as someone with fixed abilities, but as someone who grows. Not as someone limited by current knowledge, but as someone capable of acquiring whatever knowledge becomes necessary or interesting. This identity shift, this fundamental change in how you see yourself, might be the most valuable outcome of understanding learning deeply. You become someone who faces challenges with curiosity rather than fear, who sees learning opportunities everywhere, who understands that today's confusion is tomorrow's clarity if you simply persist with effective methods. You become someone who trusts in the process, who knows that if you do the work, real, focused, intelligent work, learning will happen. Not instantly, not magically, but reliably, over time, through the accumulation of small changes that compound into transformation. This is who you are now. This is what you carry forward. Not just knowledge about learning, but a new relationship with your own potential, with challenge, with growth itself. The techniques will fade from memory if you don't use them, but this deeper understanding, this recognition of your own plasticity and potential, that remains. It's a gift you give yourself, a foundation on which all future learning rests. Rest now in this completion. Let everything settle, integrate, become part of who you are. You've journeyed through the science of how humans learn, from neurons to nirvana, from hydration to hypnagogia, from simple techniques to extraordinary practices. All of it is yours now, available whenever you need it, supporting whatever learning you choose to pursue. Sleep well, dream deeply. Wake tomorrow slightly changed, slightly more capable, slightly more aligned with your potential. The journey of learning never ends, but this chapter closes here, with you resting, integrating, preparing for whatever growth comes next. Breathe, be still, be at peace. You are a learning being, and everything you need to become whatever you wish to become already exists within you, waiting only for engagement, for practice, for time. Rest now. Become.